dark history of the Ouija board. Chapter 1. The Spiritualist's Daughter. The gaslights flickered in the parlour of the Peters home, casting long shadows that danced across the faded wallpaper like restless spirits. Helen Peters, a wisp of a girl with eyes that seemed to hold secrets beyond her 17 years, sat rigidly in a high-backed chair, her fingers splayed on the polished mahogany table before her. The air hung heavy with the scent of burning sage and the palpable anticipation of the small group gathered around her. "Friends," Helen's mother, Catherine, intoned, her voice carrying the practiced cadence of a seasoned medium, "we gather tonight to pierce the veil between worlds, to seek wisdom from those who have passed beyond." Helen suppressed a shiver, her gaze darting to the faces illuminated by candlelight. Mr. Wilkinson, the town banker, his jowls quivering with each laboured breath. Mrs. Abernathy, the widow whose grief seemed to hang about her like a shroud, and young Thomas Kennard, whose bright eyes betrayed a curiosity that resonated with Helen's own. As her mother began the séance, Helen felt the familiar tingle at the base of her skull, a sensation she had come to associate with the thinning of the veil. The candles guttered, and a chill breeze swept through the room, though the windows were tightly shut against the autumn night. "Is there a spirit present who wishes to communicate?" Catherine asked, her eyes closed in concentration. The silence stretched, broken only by the creaking of the old house and the ragged breathing of the participants. Helen's heart thundered in her chest, a mix of fear and exhilaration coursing through her veins. She had assisted in her mother's séances before, but tonight felt different, charged with an energy she couldn't quite name. Suddenly Helen's hand jerked, as if pulled by an invisible force. Her fingertips danced across the table's surface, tracing letters only she could see. "Ouija," she spelled out, her voice barely above a whisper. The group leaned in, their faces a mixture of awe and trepidation. Catherine's eyes snapped open, fixing on her daughter with an intensity that made Helen want to shrink into herself. "What does it mean, child?" Mrs. Abernathy asked, her bony fingers clutching at the cameo at her throat. Helen shook her head, her chestnut curls bouncing with the movement. I don't know. It just came to me." Thomas Kennard leaned forward, his knee brushing against Helen's under the table. The contact sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with the supernatural. "It sounds foreign," he mused. "French, perhaps." Catherine raised a hand for silence, her eyes never leaving Helen's face. "The spirits have given us a name," she declared. "Ouija. A bridge between our world and theirs." As the words left her mother's lips, the candles flared brightly, then extinguished themselves in a gust of wind that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. In the sudden darkness, Helen felt a presence, ancient and unknowable, brush against her consciousness. It was gone in an instant, leaving behind a single crystal-clear thought: "This is only the beginning." The séance concluded shortly after, the participants filing out into the cool Maryland night, their hushed voices a mix of excitement and unease. Helen remained seated at the table, her fingers tracing the spot where the invisible letters had appeared. "You've done well tonight, my dear," Catherine said, placing a hand on Helen's shoulder. "The spirits have chosen you for something important." Helen looked up at her mother, searching for reassurance in those familiar eyes. "But what if I'm not ready?" "What if?" Catherine silenced her with a gentle squeeze. "You are a Peters, Helen. The gift runs in our blood. Embrace it, and you will unlock mysteries beyond imagination." As her mother swept from the room, Helen's gaze fell upon the blank surface of the table. In her mind's eye, she could still see the letters Ouija. A shiver ran down her spine as she realized that whatever had begun this night was far from over. The following days passed in a blur for Helen. Word of the mysterious communication spread through Chestertown like wildfire, drawing curious onlookers and skeptics alike to the Peters home. Helen found herself at the center of a storm of attention, a position that both thrilled and terrified her. It was on a crisp afternoon, as the leaves were turning to gold and crimson, that Thomas Kennard appeared on their doorstep. Helen's heart skipped a beat as she opened the door to find him standing there, his hat clutched in his hands. "Miss Peters," he said, a slight tremor in his voice betraying his nervousness. "I was hoping I might have a word with you about the other night." Helen glanced over her shoulder, ensuring her mother was out of earshot. "Of course, Mr. Kennard. Please, come in." She led him to the garden, away from prying eyes and ears. As they walked among the withering roses, Thomas's excitement bubbled over. "I've been thinking about what happened about this Ouija business," he said, his eyes alight with possibility. "What if we could create something, a tool to help people communicate with the other side?" Helen stopped, turning to face him. "What do you mean?" Thomas fumbled in his pocket, producing a folded piece of paper. As he unfolded it, Helen saw a rough sketch of a board covered in letters and numbers with a small heart-shaped pointer. "I call it a talking board," Thomas explained, his words tumbling out in a rush. "We could use it to spell out messages from the spirits, just like you did on the table." Helen studied the drawing, a mix of fascination and trepidation washing over her. "It's an intriguing idea, Mr. Kennard, but isn't it dangerous to meddle in such things?" Thomas took her hand, his touch sending a thrill through her. "Think of the good we could do, Helen. We could bring comfort to the bereaved, answers to the lost. With your gift and my uncle's connections in the novelty trade, we could change the world." As Helen looked into Thomas's earnest face, she felt herself being drawn in by his enthusiasm. Yet a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a warning, reminding her of the unknown presence she had felt that night. "I'll need to think about it," she said at last, gently withdrawing her hand from his. Thomas nodded, his smile undimmed. "Of course. But please consider the possibilities. This could be the start of something truly remarkable." As he took his leave, Helen stood alone in the garden, the sketch of the talking board clutched in her hand. The autumn wind whispered through the trees, and for a moment she could have sworn she heard it form a word, Ouija. She looked down at the drawing once more, her decision crystallizing in her mind. Whatever forces were at work, whatever consequences might come, Helen knew that her path was now irrevocably entwined with this mysterious Ouija. With a mixture of determination and apprehension, she turned back toward the house, ready to embrace the destiny that awaited her. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Chestertown. In the growing darkness, Helen Peters took her first steps toward a future that would change not only her life, but the very fabric of American spiritualism. The Ouija board was about to be born, and with it, a legacy that would span generations, blurring the lines between this world and the next. Chapter 2. The Inventor's Vision. The gas lamp on Charles Kennard's desk sputtered, casting an uneven light across the scattered papers and half-finished sketches that covered its surface. Charles leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his dishevelled hair as he studied the latest iteration of the talking board design. The autumn wind howled outside, rattling the windows of his modest Baltimore apartment, but he barely noticed, lost in the possibilities that danced before his mind's eye. A sharp knock at the door startled him from his reverie. "Come in," he called, hastily straightening his waistcoat. Elijah Bond strode into the room, his lawyer's briefcase in one hand and a bottle of brandy in the other. "I thought you might need some fortification," he said, his eyes twinkling with a mix of amusement and concern. "You look like you haven't slept in days." Charles managed a wry smile. "Sleep is a luxury we can't afford, my friend. Not when we're on the brink of something extraordinary." Elijah set the bottle on the desk and peered at the drawings. "Is this the latest design?" "Indeed," Charles nodded, his enthusiasm returning. "I've refined the planchette. See how it tapers here. It should glide more smoothly across the surface." As Elijah examined the sketches, Charles found himself studying his friend and business partner. Where Charles was all nervous energy and flights of fancy, Elijah was steady, grounded. His legal mind brought a pragmatism to their venture that Charles knew was essential, even if he sometimes chafed against it. "It's impressive," Elijah admitted, "but, Charles, we need to discuss the ethical implications of what we're creating." Charles felt a familiar tension creep into his shoulders. "We've been over this, Elijah. We're not charlatans or frauds. We're providing a tool, nothing more." "A tool that purports to communicate with the dead," Elijah countered, his voice low and serious. "You've seen how people react to these spiritualist gatherings. The desperation, the hope, and the crushing disappointment when their loved ones don't appear." For a moment, Charles saw not his friend and partner, but Helen Peters's face, alight with a mixture of fear and wonder as she spelled out those mysterious letters, OUIJA. He shook his head, banishing the image. "That's precisely why our board is different," Charles insisted, warming to his theme. "We're not claiming any special powers or charging exorbitant fees for seances. We're putting the power directly into people's hands. If there's comfort to be found, let them find it for themselves." Elijah sighed, pouring 2 glasses of brandy. "And if there's more to it than that, what if we're opening a door we don't fully understand?" Charles accepted the glass, swirling the amber liquid thoughtfully. "Then we'll face that if the time comes. For now, we have a business to build." As if on cue, there was another knock at the door. This time, it swung open to reveal William Fuld, Charles's brother-in-law and their newly appointed production manager. "Gentlemen," William said, his voice carrying the crisp efficiency that had quickly made him indispensable to their fledgling enterprise. "I've just come from the workshop. The first prototype is ready for testing." Charles and Elijah exchanged a look, years of friendship allowing for a silent communication. Whatever doubts they harboured, whatever consequences loomed on the horizon, there was no turning back now. "Well then," Charles said, draining his glass and standing, "let's see if we can talk to the dead." The workshop occupied the ground floor of a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of Baltimore. As Charles, Elijah, and William entered, the scent of freshly cut wood and varnish enveloped them. In the centre of the room, illuminated by a circle of candles, sat their creation. The Ouija board, for they had all agreed to adopt the mysterious name that had come to Helen Peters, was a thing of simple beauty. The letters were carved with precision, the surface polished to a high sheen. The planchette, heart-shaped and delicate, seemed to quiver in the candlelight as if eager to begin its work. "It's perfect," Charles breathed, running his fingers reverently along the board's edge. William nodded, a hint of pride in his voice. "The craftsmanship is excellent. Whatever else it may be, it's a fine piece of woodwork." Elijah, ever the voice of caution, cleared his throat. "Shall we test it then, see if it actually works?" The 3 men settled around the board, their fingers resting lightly on the planchette. Charles felt a frisson of excitement run through him, tinged with a hint of fear he wouldn't admit to. "Is there a spirit present who wishes to communicate?" he asked, unconsciously mimicking the cadence he'd heard mediums use. For a long moment, nothing happened. The planchette sat motionless beneath their fingertips, the only sound the faint crackle of the candles and the men's measured breathing. Then, slowly at first, but with increasing surety, the planchette began to move. E.S. Charles felt his heart leap into his throat. He glanced at his companions, saw the same mix of awe and disbelief mirrored in their faces. "Who are you?" Elijah asked, his lawyer's skepticism warring with the evidence of his own eyes. The planchette moved again, more confidently now. Z-O-Z-O, a chill ran down Charles's spine, though he couldn't have said why. "So, is that your name?" Instead of answering, the planchette began to move erratically, skittering across the board with a speed that seemed impossible given the light touch of their fingers. It spelled out fragments of words, numbers, and symbols that made no sense. 7 to 9 minus 3, death open 6 to 6 minus 6. Stop! William cried, snatching his hands away. The planchette gave one final, violent jerk, then lay still. The three men stared at each other, their faces pale in the flickering candlelight. Charles was the first to break the silence, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Well, gentlemen, I'd say that was a successful test, wouldn't you?" Elijah frowned, studying the board as if it might reveal its secrets under his gaze. "Successful, yes, but what exactly did we contact?" William, always practical, had already begun taking notes. "Whatever it was, it proves the concept works. We can refine it, of course. Perhaps add some safeguards." As his companions discussed the technical aspects of their creation, Charles found his mind wandering. He thought of Helen Peters, of the look in her eyes when she first spelled out the name Ouija. He thought of the countless people who would use this board, seeking comfort, answers, or simply a thrill. And somewhere, in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered a warning. They had created something powerful, something that bridged the gap between this world and whatever lay beyond. But, as with any bridge, traffic could flow both ways. Charles pushed the thought aside. They were on the cusp of something revolutionary, something that would change the world. Whatever risks there might be, whatever consequences might come, he was certain that the potential for good and for profit far outweighed any dangers. As the night wore on and plans were made, the Ouija board sat silently in the centre of the workshop. In the guttering candlelight, the polished wood seemed to absorb the shadows, holding secrets that its creators could only begin to imagine. The die was cast. The Ouija board would soon make its way into the homes and hearts of America, carrying with it the promise of communion with the beyond and the whispered threat of things best left undisturbed. Chapter 3. The Patent Miracle. The Washington, D.C. Patent Office loomed before them, its neoclassical facade a monument to human ingenuity and progress. Charles Kennard felt a flutter of anticipation in his chest as he ascended the marble steps, the weight of the Ouija board prototype tucked securely under his arm. Beside him, Elijah Bond's face was a mask of professional calm, but Charles could sense the undercurrent of tension in his friend's stride. "Remember," Elijah murmured as they reached the top of the stairs, "let me do the talking. These bureaucrats respond better to legal jargon than flights of fancy." Charles nodded, swallowing his protest. He knew Elijah was right, but part of him yearned to share the true wonder of their creation, to make these staid government men understand the power they were about to unleash upon the world. The interior of the patent office was a labyrinth of polished wood and brass, the air heavy with the scent of paper and ink. They were directed to a waiting area, where Charles found himself fidgeting, unable to sit still. His mind raced with possibilities and doubts in equal measure. What if they were denied? What if someone else had already patented a similar device? What if Kennard and Bond? A clerk called, interrupting Charles' spiralling thoughts. "Mr. Sloane will see you now." They were ushered into a small office, cramped with filing cabinets and stacks of documents. Behind a massive oak desk sat Robert Sloane, the patent examiner. His lined face and steel-grey hair spoke of decades spent scrutinizing the dreams and schemes of countless inventors. "Gentlemen," Sloane said, his voice as dry as the papers surrounding him, "I understand you're here to patent a—" "Talking board." Elijah stepped forward, all business. "Indeed, Mr. Sloane. We believe our invention represents a significant advancement in the field of spiritual communication devices." Sloane's eyebrow arched skeptically. "Spiritual communication? Surely you jest, Mr. Bond. The Patent Office deals in scientific fact, not mystical nonsense." Charles felt a flash of indignation, but Elijah's steady hand on his arm kept him silent. "I assure you, Mr. Sloane, our device operates on sound principles of user interaction and psychological suggestion. If you'll allow us to demonstrate." Sloane waved a dismissive hand. Very well, but I warn you, I've seen all manner of so-called spiritual devices. None have ever proven to be more than elaborate parlor tricks. With practiced efficiency, Charles set up the Ouija board on Sloane's desk, carefully placing the planchette in the center. Sloane leaned forward, despite himself, to examine the craftsmanship. "I must admit," he said grudgingly, "it is a fine piece of woodwork. But how does it function?" Charles and Elijah exchanged a glance. This was the moment of truth. "Perhaps a demonstration would be more effective than an explanation," Charles suggested, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. "If you'd be willing to participate, Mr. Sloane." The patent examiner hesitated, then nodded curtly. "Very well, but I warn you I'm not easily fooled." The three men gathered around the board, their fingertips resting lightly on the planchette. Charles took a deep breath, feeling that familiar tingle of anticipation at the base of his skull. "Is there a spirit present who wishes to communicate?" he intoned, his voice barely above a whisper. For a long moment nothing happened. Charles could feel Sloane's skepticism radiating like a physical force. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the planchette began to move. Yes. Sloane's eyes widened, but he quickly composed himself. "A simple trick of unconscious muscle movement, no doubt," he muttered. "Perhaps you'd like to ask a question, Mr. Sloane?" Elijah suggested smoothly. "Something only you would know the answer to." Sloane's brow furrowed in thought. "Very well, what is my middle name? It's not listed in any official documents, and I've never shared it with anyone in this office." The planchette remained still for a moment, then began to move with surprising speed and certainty. "ERNEST. The colour drained from Sloane's face. He snatched his hands away from the planchette as if it had burned him. "How? How is this possible?" he stammered. Charles felt a mixture of elation and unease. They had convinced the skeptical patent examiner, but at what cost? What forces were they truly dealing with? Elijah, ever the pragmatist, seized the moment. "As you can see, Mr. Sloane, our device is capable of accessing information beyond the conscious knowledge of its users. Surely you can appreciate the scientific and psychological implications of such a tool." Sloane nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the Ouija board. Yes, I suppose I can. Gentlemen, I believe we have some paperwork to fill out." As Elijah began discussing the technical details of the patent application with Sloane, Charles found his gaze drawn back to the board. In the stark light of the office, it seemed somehow more ominous than it had in the workshop. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had crossed a threshold, one from which there was no turning back. The journey back to Baltimore was a blur of exhilaration and exhaustion. As the train car rattled through the countryside, Charles and Elijah sat in contemplative silence, each lost in his own thoughts. "We did it," Charles said at last, a note of wonder in his voice. "We actually did it." Elijah nodded, a rare smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Indeed we did. Though I must admit I'm still not entirely sure what it is." Charles leaned forward, his eyes shining with the fervour of a true believer. "Don't you see, Elijah? We've created a bridge between worlds, a way for the living to commune with the dead, to seek wisdom and comfort from beyond the veil. Or," Elijah countered, his legal mind ever cautious, "we've stumbled upon a remarkably effective method of tapping into the subconscious mind. Either way, the implications are staggering." As the two friends debated the nature of their creation, neither noticed the shadow that seemed to flicker at the edge of their vision, nor the faint whisper that might have been the wind, or something else entirely. Back in Baltimore, William Fuld was waiting for them at the station, his face alight with anticipation. "Well," he demanded as soon as they stepped onto the platform, "how did it go?" Charles couldn't contain his grin. "We got it, William. The patent is ours." William clapped them both on the back, his mind already racing with possibilities. "Excellent. I've already begun preparations for mass production. We'll need to move quickly to capitalize on this." As they made their way through the bustling streets, discussing marketing strategies and production timelines, Charles found his excitement tempered by a nagging sense of unease. He thought of Helen Peters, of the look in her eyes when she first channeled the name Ouija. He thought of the patent examiner's face, drained of colour as the planchette spelled out his closely guarded secret. What had they truly unleashed upon the world, and more importantly, could they control it? As if in answer to his unspoken question, a gust of wind swept down the street, carrying with it the crisp scent of autumn leaves and something else, something older, wilder, and infinitely more dangerous. For a moment, Charles could have sworn he heard a voice on the wind, a whisper that sounded eerily like, "Zozo." He shook his head, banishing the thought. They were on the cusp of something revolutionary, something that would change the world. Whatever risks there might be, whatever consequences might come, he was certain that the potential for good and for profit far outweighed any dangers. And yet, as night fell all over Baltimore and the first stars appeared in the sky, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, beyond the veil, something was watching, waiting, and smiling. Chapter 4, Whispers of the Dead. The Kennard Novelty Company's factory floor buzzed with activity, the air thick with sawdust and the acrid scent of fresh varnish. William Fould stood at the centre of the organised chaos, his keen eyes surveying the production line with a mixture of pride and barely contained excitement. Row upon row of Ouija boards moved steadily through the various stages of manufacture, each one a potential conduit to the great beyond. "Impressive, isn't it?" William said, turning to Charles Kennard and Elijah Bond as they approached. "We're producing 100 boards a day, and demand is only increasing." Charles nodded, running his hand along the smooth surface of a newly completed board. "It's remarkable, William. I never imagined we'd grow so quickly." Elijah, ever the pragmatist, frowned slightly. "And what of quality control? We can't afford to have defective products reaching the public, not with something as sensitive as this." William's chest puffed out with pride. "I've implemented a rigorous inspection process. Every board is tested before it leaves the factory." "Tested?" Charles asked, arching an eyebrow. "How exactly?" A shadow passed over William's face, so quickly that Charles might have imagined it. "We have a team of experienced users who put each board through its paces. Rest assured, only those that perform satisfactorily are approved for sale." Before Charles could press further, a commotion near the factory entrance drew their attention. A young woman, her face flushed with emotion, was arguing with one of the foremen. "Please, I must speak with Mr. Kennard," she insisted, her voice carrying across the factory floor. "It's about the board. It's urgent." Charles exchanged a glance with Elijah, then nodded to the foreman. The woman hurried over, clutching a Ouija board to her chest as if it were a shield. "Mr. Kennard," she said, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder, "my name is Emily Thornton. First, I need your help." Charles led her to a small office off the main floor, gesturing for her to sit. Elijah and William followed, closing the door behind them. "Now, Miss Thornton," Charles said gently, "what seems to be the trouble?" Emily took a deep breath, her fingers tracing the letters on the board she held. "It started innocently enough. My sister and I, we bought one of your boards last month. We were just looking for a bit of fun, you see. But then—" Her voice trailed off, and Charles leaned forward, encouraging her to continue. "Go on," he urged. "Whatever it is, you can tell us." Emily's eyes met his, brimming with unshed tears. "It knew things, Mr. Kennard. Things it couldn't possibly know. About our family, about our father who passed away last year." Elijah cleared his throat, his lawyer's instincts kicking in. "Miss Thornton, I'm sure there's a perfectly rational explanation." "No." Emily interrupted, her voice rising. "You don't understand. It told us where to find his will, a document none of us knew existed. And when we looked, it was exactly where the board said it would be." A heavy silence fell over the room. Charles felt a chill run down his spine, remembering the eerie accuracy of their own experience in the patent office. William was the first to speak, his voice carefully neutral. "Miss Thornton, while we're pleased that our product has brought you closure, we cannot claim any supernatural abilities for the Ouija board. It's merely a tool for accessing one's own subconscious." "Then how do you explain this?" Emily demanded, pulling a folded newspaper from her handbag. She spread it on the desk, pointing to a small article near the bottom of the page. Charles leaned in to read the headline, "Local Family Credits Spirit Board with Solving Decades-Old Mystery." As he skimmed the article, his unease grew. It detailed how a family in Richmond had used a Ouija board to locate the remains of a long-lost relative, missing for over 30 years. "This isn't an isolated incident, Mr. Kennard," Emily said, her voice steadier now. "People are talking. The board, it's changing lives, but it's also scaring people. We need to know, what have you really created?" Charles looked at his partners, seeing his own uncertainty mirrored in their faces. They had started this venture with dreams of profit and perhaps a touch of whimsy, but now, faced with mounting evidence of the board's inexplicable abilities, he felt the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. "Miss Thornton," he said at last, choosing his words carefully, "I assure you that we take these reports very seriously. While we can't explain every experience, we believe that the Ouija board is a powerful tool for self-reflection and perhaps for connecting with something greater than ourselves. But it's important to remember that it should be used responsibly, with respect and caution." Emily nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "I understand, I thought you should know what's happening out there. People are going to have questions and they're going to look to you for answers." After Emily left, the three partners remained in the office, each lost in thought. The steady hum of the factory beyond the door seemed suddenly distant, as if they were isolated in a bubble of uncertainty. "We need to be careful," Elijah said at last, breaking the silence. "These stories, if they spread—" "They're already spreading," William interjected. "And from a business perspective, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Mystery sells, gentlemen." Charles shook his head, pacing the small room. "This is more than just business now. If the board truly has these capabilities, we have a responsibility to understand it, to guide people in its use." "Or to shut it down entirely," Elijah muttered, though there was little conviction in his voice. "No," Charles said firmly. "We've started something here, something bigger than any of us anticipated. We can't stop it now, even if we wanted to. The question is, how do we control it?" As if in answer, a gust of wind rattled the office window, carrying with it the faint sound of whispering voices. The three men looked at each other, a shared shiver of recognition passing between them. "Perhaps," William said slowly, "the better question is, how do we prevent it from controlling us?" Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the factory floor. The neatly stacked Ouija boards seemed to absorb the fading light, their polished surfaces gleaming with untold secrets. And in homes across America, more and more people were gathering around these simple wooden boards, their fingers poised on heart-shaped planchettes, ready to pierce the veil between worlds. The Ouija board had begun its journey into the heart of American culture, carrying with it the promise of answers, the thrill of the unknown, and the lurking shadow of forces beyond mortal comprehension. For Charles Kennard and his partners, the true test was just beginning. They had opened a door, and now they would have to face whatever came through it, for better or for worse. Chapter 5. War and Spirits.
The year was 1917, and the world was at war. The streets of Baltimore, once bustling with carefree energy, now thrummed with a different kind of tension.
Young men in crisp uniforms marched off to ships bound for distant shores, while those left behind clung to hope and prayer with equal desperation. In the offices of the Kennard Novelty Company, now under the sole control of William Fuld, business was booming. The Ouija board, once a parlour game for the curious and adventurous, had taken on a new significance in these dark times. It had become a lifeline for those seeking connection with loved ones far away, or worse, with those who would never return. William sat at his desk, poring over production reports and sales figures that seemed to climb higher with each passing week. A knock at the door interrupted his calculations. "Come in," he called, not bothering to look up from his papers. Charles Kennard entered, his once boyish face now lined with the weight of years and worry. "William," he said, his voice carrying a note of urgency, "we need to talk about the board." William sighed, finally meeting his brother-in-law's gaze. "Charles, we've been over this. The business is mine now, fair and square. Your concerns about the board's nature are no longer relevant." Charles shook his head, frustration evident in every line of his body. "This isn't about ownership, William. It's about responsibility. Have you seen the letters we're receiving? The testimonials?" Without waiting for a response, Charles tossed a stack of envelopes onto William's desk. They spilled across the polished surface, each one bearing the telltale signs of having travelled a great distance. "These are from soldiers at the front," Charles explained, his voice softening. "They're using the board to communicate with fallen comrades, to seek guidance in battle. And their families back home. They're desperate for any word, any sign." William leafed through the letters, his expression unreadable. "And what would you have me do, Charles? Cease production? Deny comfort to those who seek it?" "No," Charles said, sinking into a chair across from William. "But we need to be careful. The board. It's becoming more than just a game. It's becoming a religion." As if to underscore his point, a commotion erupted in the street below. Both men moved to the window, watching as a group of women marched past, carrying signs that read, "Ouija speaks the truth and the dead have a voice." William's lips thinned into a tight line. "I see your point, but this fervour, it will pass. Once the war is over, and what if it doesn't?" Charles interrupted. "What if this is just the beginning?" Before William could respond, his secretary burst into the room, her face pale with excitement. "Mr. Fuld, Mr. Kennard, you need to see this." She thrust a newspaper into William's hands. The headline blared, "Ouija Board predicts end of war, spiritualists claim." Charles and William exchanged a look of mingled disbelief and apprehension. The article detailed a séance held in New York, where a group of prominent spiritualists claimed to have contacted the spirit of a German general who prophesied the war's end through a Ouija board. "This is getting out of hand," Charles muttered, running a hand through his greying hair. William remained silent for a long moment, his mind racing with implications both financial and moral. Finally he spoke, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Perhaps we need to issue some kind of statement, a guide for proper use, or disclaimer." Charles nodded, relief washing over him. "Yes, exactly. Something to remind people that the board is a tool, not a oracle. That it should be used with discretion and—" A sharp crack interrupted him, like a gunshot, but closer, more immediate. Both men whirled to face the source of the sound, only to find that the large mirror hanging on William's office wall had split down the middle, a jagged line running from top to bottom. In the fractured reflection, for just a moment, Charles could have sworn he saw a figure standing behind them, a shadow with gleaming eyes and a wide, unsettling grin. He blinked, and it was gone. William's face had gone ashen. What was that?" Charles shook his head, unable to find words. The air in the room felt suddenly thick, charged with an energy that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. "I don't know," he said at last, "but I think we may have waited too long to act. The years passed and the Great War gave way to an uneasy peace. The Ouija board's popularity showed no signs of waning, its influence spreading far beyond the séance rooms and parlours where it had first found fame. In 1927, William Fuld's life came to a tragic and mysterious end, falling from the roof of his factory while supervising the installation of a flagpole. The official verdict was accident, but whispers of a darker fate, of a man haunted by his own creation, persisted. Charles, now in the twilight of his years, watched from the sidelines as the Ouija phenomenon continued to grow. He had long since distanced himself from the business, but he could never quite shake the feeling of responsibility for what he had helped unleash upon the world. It was in 1944, as another world war raged across the globe, that Charles received a visitor who would force him to confront the legacy of the Ouija board one last time. The man who stood on Charles's doorstep was young, barely out of his teens, with the haunted eyes of someone who had seen too much, too soon. He introduced himself as Private Thomas Gale, recently returned from the European theatre. "Mr. Kennard," the young soldier said, his voice trembling slightly, "I need your help. It's about the Ouija board. Something's happening, and I don't know who else to turn to." Charles felt a chill run down his spine, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. He ushered the young man inside, knowing that whatever came next would change everything once again. As Private Gale began to speak, weaving a tale of secret military operations, psychic experiments, and whispers of an impending Ouija panic, Charles realized that the true impact of his creation was only just beginning to be felt. The door he and his partners had opened all those years ago was still wide open, and through it, forces beyond their wildest imaginations were pouring into a world that might not be ready to face them. Chapter 6. The roaring board, the speakeasy, was a riot of colour and sound, a hidden oasis of hedonism in the heart of Prohibition-era New York City. Smoke curled lazily through the air, mingling with the strains of jazz and the raucous laughter of the city's elite. In a secluded corner, partially obscured by a beaded curtain, a group of finely dressed men and women huddled around a small table, their fingers resting lightly on a heart-shaped planchette. "Oh, spirits!" crooned Vivienne Dubois, her voice a throaty purr that carried even over the din of the club. "Tell us, darlings, who among us will find true love this year?" The planchette began to move, spelling out its message with uncanny speed. ALLWHOSEEKIT. A chorus of delighted gasps and giggles erupted from the group. Vivienne tossed her head back, her elaborate coiffure shimmering in the low light. "You hear that, boys? Better start seeking." From his vantage point at the bar, Detective James Sullivan watched the scene with a mixture of amusement and unease. He'd seen a lot in his years on the force, but the Ouija board craze that had gripped the city never failed to perplex him. What was it about those simple wooden boards that had everyone from street urchins to society dames so enthralled? "Another whiskey, detective?" the bartender asked, already reaching for the bottle. Sullivan nodded, his eyes never leaving the séance in the corner. "Thanks, Joe. And keep 'em coming. Something tells me it's going to be a long night." As if on cue, the beaded curtain parted, and a man Sullivan recognized all too well stepped into view. Charlie Lucky Luciano, his sharp eyes scanning the room before settling on the Ouija board gathering. A wolfish grin spread across his face as he sauntered over, placing a proprietary hand on Vivienne's shoulder. "Ladies and gentlemen," Luciano announced, his voice carrying a hint of menace beneath its charm, "I hope you don't mind if I join your little party. I've got a few questions of my own for the spirits." Sullivan tensed, his hand instinctively moving towards his concealed weapon. Luciano at a séance could only mean trouble. The gangster settled into an empty chair, his fingers joining the others on the planchette. "Now then," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "let's see if these spirits of yours can tell me who's been skimming from my operations downtown." The room seemed to hold its breath as the planchette began to move once more. BEWARETHERAT. Luciano's face darkened, his grip on the planchette tightening visibly. "What rat? Give me a name." But before the board could answer, a commotion at the speakeasy's entrance drew everyone's attention. Two of Luciano's men burst in, their faces pale with urgency. "Boss!" one of them panted. "It's Frankie! They found him down by the docks. He's dead." The Ouija board clattered to the floor, forgotten in the sudden chaos. Sullivan was on his feet in an instant, but Luciano and his men were already gone, vanishing into the night like smoke. The next morning, Sullivan stood at the edge of the East River, watching as the coroner's men fished a waterlogged body from the murky depths. Frank, the Weasel Moretti, one of Luciano's low-level enforcers, stared up at the grey sky with lifeless eyes. "What's the verdict?" Doc Sullivan asked as the coroner straightened up from his preliminary examination. The older man shook his head, his face grim. "Beaten, shot, then dumped. Whoever did this wanted to send a message." Sullivan nodded, his mind racing. A dead gangster was nothing new in this city, but the timing, so soon after that bizarre scene at the speakeasy. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than a simple mob hit. As he turned to leave, something caught his eye. Clutched in the dead man's rigid fist was a small wooden object. Sullivan pried it free, his breath catching as he recognized it, a Ouija board planchette, its surface marred by a single word carved deep into the wood. R.A.T. Over the next weeks, the city buzzed with rumors and speculation. The papers dubbed it the Ouija Board murder, their lurid headlines stoking the public's fascination with the supernatural and the criminal underworld in equal measure. Sullivan found himself diving deeper into the strange intersection of spiritualism and organized crime. He attended seances in opulent Park Avenue penthouses and smoke-filled back rooms, watching as mediums and mobsters alike sought guidance from the other side. It was at one such gathering, held in the palatial home of a prominent judge, that Sullivan encountered a familiar face. "Well, if it isn't New York's finest," Vivian Dubois purred, sidling up to him with a champagne flute in hand. "Come to ask the spirits to solve your case, Detective." Sullivan managed a wry smile. "Just observing, Miss Dubois. Though I wouldn't say no if any helpful information came my way." Vivian's laugh was like tinkling crystal. "Oh, darling, in this city information is the most valuable currency of all. And these days it seems the dead have plenty to say." As if to prove her point, a hush fell over the room as the séance began. The Ouija board at the centre of the table was a far cry from the simple wooden versions Sullivan had seen before. This one was inlaid with mother-of-pearl and precious stones, its surface gleaming in the candlelight. The medium, a severe-looking woman with steel-grey hair, closed her eyes and began to intone, "Spirits of the beyond, we seek your wisdom. What secrets lie behind the veil of death?" The planchette moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost unnatural, spelling out its cryptic message, THEVELISTHINDANGERCOMES. A collective gasp rose from the assembled guests. Sullivan felt a chill run down his spine, though he couldn't have said why. As the séance continued, with the spirits offering vague prophecies and personal messages to the eager participants, Sullivan found his mind wandering. He thought of Frank Moretti's waterlogged corpse, of Lucky Luciano's dark eyes as he questioned the Ouija board, of the growing obsession that seemed to have gripped the city. What was it about these simple boards that held such power over people? And more importantly, how were they connected to the underworld of crime and violence that Sullivan navigated daily? As the evening wore on, Sullivan slipped away from the gathering, his head spinning with questions. He stepped out onto the judge's balcony, grateful for the cool night air on his face. The city sprawled before him, a glittering tapestry of lights and shadows. Somewhere out there, he knew, lurked the answers he sought, but as he gazed out at the urban landscape, Sullivan couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the precipice of something far larger and more dangerous than a simple murder investigation. The Ouija board had woven itself into the very fabric of New York society, from the glittering heights of Manhattan penthouses to the grimy depths of the criminal underworld. And as the planchette had warned, danger was coming. Sullivan lit a cigarette, its ember glowing like a tiny beacon in the night. Whatever storm was brewing, he would be ready to face it. But as he exhaled a plume of smoke into the darkness, he couldn't help but wonder. In a world where the dead seemed to speak more freely than the living, who could he truly trust? The mystery of the Ouija board murder was far from solved, and Sullivan had a sinking feeling that it was only the beginning of a much larger, darker story unfolding in the heart of the Roaring Twenties. Chapter 7. Fould's Folly, the Ouija board empire that William Fould had built from the ashes of the Kennard Novelty Company stood as a testament to his business acumen and relentless ambition. As the Roaring Twenties gave way to the uncertain 30s, Fould's factories churned out board after board, each one promising a glimpse into the great beyond. On a crisp autumn morning in 1926, William stood at the window of his opulent office, surveying the sprawling factory complex below. The rhythmic clatter of machinery and the shouts of workers rose up to him, a symphony of industry that should have filled him with pride. Instead, a nameless dread had taken root in his chest, growing with each passing day. "Mr. Fould." His secretary's voice startled him from his reverie. "The board of directors is waiting for you in the conference room." William nodded, straightening his tie. "Thank you, Miss Harper. I'll be right there." As he made his way through the corridors, the walls seemed to close in around him. The framed newspaper clippings and advertisements that lined the hallway, testaments to the Ouija board's meteoric rise, now felt like accusatory fingers pointing at him. The board meeting was a blur of profit projections and expansion plans. William found himself nodding along, his mind elsewhere. It was only when the room fell silent that he realized everyone was staring at him expectantly. "I'm sorry," he said, clearing his throat. "What was the question?" Harold Brimley, one of the senior board members, leaned forward with a concerned frown. "We were discussing the possibility of opening a new factory in Chicago, William." "Are you feeling all right? You seem distracted." William forced a smile. "Just a bit tired, that's all." "The Chicago expansion sounds excellent. Let's move forward with it." As the meeting adjourned, William felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Marcus Holloway, his oldest friend on the board, and the only one who knew the true origins of the Ouija board. "Walk with me, William," Marcus said quietly. They made their way to the factory floor, the noise forcing them to lean in close to speak. "What's really going on?" Marcus asked. "And don't give me that just tired nonsense." William sighed, his shoulders sagging. "It's the board, Marcus. I think it's trying to tell me something." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You've been using it. I thought you swore off that years ago." "I did," William replied, his voice barely audible over the machinery. "But lately I can't seem to help myself. And the messages, Marcus, they're not good." Before Marcus could respond, a worker approached them, holding what appeared to be a Ouija board. "Mr. Fould, sir, we found this one in the reject pile, but there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with it. Should we put it back in circulation?" William reached for the board, but as his fingers brushed its surface, a jolt of electricity seemed to pass through him. In that instant he saw a vision of himself falling, tumbling through empty air towards an unforgiving ground. The board clattered to the factory floor. "William," Marcus exclaimed, steadying his friend. "What happened?" William stared at the fallen board, his face ashen. That board, destroy it, and check the others from that batch. There's something wrong with them." The worker nodded, confused but obedient, and hurried away with the board. Marcus led William to a quiet corner. "What did you see?" "My death," William whispered. "I saw my own death." In the weeks that followed, William became obsessed with the idea of the cursed Ouija set, a batch of boards that he believed carried a malevolent energy. He ordered countless tests and inspections, much to the bewilderment of his employees and the concern of his board members. But as 1927 dawned, a new project consumed him, the addition of 3 flagpoles to the factory roof. It was to be a grand gesture, a symbol of the company's patriotism and success. On the day of the installation, February 24th, William insisted on overseeing the work personally. The winter wind whipped around him as he stood on the roof, watching the workers secure the base of the central flagpole. Marcus, who had come to check on his friend, called out from the access door, "William, come down from there. It's not safe." William turned, a strange calm settling over him. In that moment he knew with absolute certainty that the visions had been real. This was how it would end. "It's all right, Marcus," he called back. "I understand now. The board. It wasn't warning me. It was guiding me." As Marcus watched in horror, William took a step backwards. His heel caught on a coil of rope, and suddenly he was falling, just as he had seen in his vision. The world spun around him, the grey sky and red brick of the factory blurring together. In the split second before impact, William Fuld felt a sense of release. The burden of knowledge, the weight of the empire he had built on the bones of spiritualism and human desperation, all of it fell away. His last thought was of the Ouija board that had started it all, and he wondered if, at last, he would learn its true secrets. The impact, when it came, was both brutal and merciful in its finality. In the aftermath of William Fuld's death, the Ouija board empire he had built faced an uncertain future. The official story was that of a tragic accident, but whispers of suicide and even murder circulated among those who knew of his recent erratic behaviour. Marcus Holloway, now acting as interim CEO, sat alone in William's office late one night, a bottle of whiskey and a Ouija board his only companions. With trembling fingers he placed his hands on the planchette. "William," he whispered, "if you're there, what really happened?" The planchette remained stubbornly still for a long moment. Then, slowly, it began to move. THEBOARDALWAYSWINS. Marcus snatched his hands away, his heart pounding. He stared at the board, its innocuous surface betraying nothing of the power it held. In homes across America, people continued to gather around Ouija boards, seeking answers, comfort, or thrills. Few knew of the dark history behind their creation, of the men who had risen and fallen in the pursuit of bridging the gap between this world and the next. And somewhere, in a dusty corner of the Fuld factory, a single Ouija board from the infamous cursed set lay forgotten, waiting for the day when it would once again channel messages from beyond the veil, messages that would shape the lives and deaths of all who dared to listen. Chapter 8. Great Depression. Greater Belief. The stock market crash of 1929 plunged America into an era of unprecedented hardship. As breadlines grew and hope dwindled, an unlikely beacon of solace emerged from the gloom, the Ouija board. In homes across the nation, from cramped tenements to foreclosed farmhouses, families gathered around these simple wooden devices, seeking guidance, comfort, and perhaps a miracle. Emma Blackwood's fingers trembled as she placed them on the heart-shaped planchette. Across the table, her husband John's calloused hands joined hers, his face a mask of desperate determination. Their children, Tom and Sarah, watched wide-eyed from the corner of their small Kansas farmhouse kitchen. "Please," Emma whispered, her voice cracking, "we need help. The bank's threatening to take the farm." "Tell us what to do." For a long moment, the only sound was the howling of the dust-laden wind outside. Then, slowly, the planchette began to move, HOLDONHOPECOMES. John's grip tightened on Emma's hand. "What does it mean? How long can we hold on?" Before Emma could respond, a knock at the door startled them all. John rose to answer it, his brow furrowed with worry. On the porch stood a well-dressed man, his hat clutched in his hands. "Mr. Blackwood," the stranger asked. "My name is Theodore Gale. I represent a group of investors interested in oil rights. We have reason to believe there might be oil on your land." Emma's gaze darted to the Ouija board, her heart pounding. Could this be the hope the spirits had promised? Miles away, in a dusty field on the outskirts of a small Oklahoma town, the carnival was coming to life. Strings of lights flickered to life, casting a warm glow over weather-beaten tents and rickety rides. At the centre of it all stood a garish purple and gold tent, emblazoned with the words, "Madame Zostra's Ouija Emporium, commune with the beyond." Inside, Madame Zostra, known to her few friends as Betty Miller, adjusted her elaborate turban and surveyed her domain. The tent was filled with Ouija boards of every description, from simple wooden models to ornate creations inlaid with mother-of-pearl and semi-precious stones. A young man slipped through the tent flap, his eyes darting nervously around the dimly lit space. "Madame Zostra?" he asked hesitantly. Betty turned, her bangles jangling. "Welcome, seeker," she intoned, her voice dropping to a mystical whisper. "What answers do you seek from the spirit realm?" The young man stepped closer, lowering his voice. "It's me, Madame Z. Jimmy. I've got news from Chicago." Betty's shoulders sagged, the Madame Zostra persona falling away. "What is it, kid? Spit it out." Jimmy's eyes gleamed with excitement. "It worked! That tip about the inheritance? The Mark bought it hook, line and sinker. He's ready to hand over his life savings to claim his fortune." A slow smile spread across Betty's face. "Well done, Jimmy. We'll make a proper con artist of you yet." She paused, a flicker of doubt crossing her features. "But remember, we're just giving these people hope. A little comfort in hard times. We're not really hurting anyone." Jimmy nodded, though the gleam in his eyes suggested he might not share her scruples. "Sure, Madame Z. Whatever you say." As Jimmy left, Betty turned back to her array of Ouija boards. She ran her fingers over the smooth surface of the nearest one, a chill running down her spine as the planchette seemed to quiver beneath her touch. "Just a trick of the light," she muttered to herself. But deep down, Betty couldn't shake the feeling that she was playing with forces beyond her understanding. Back in New York, the offices of the fooled company, still reeling from the loss of its founder, buzzed with activity. Marcus Holloway, now firmly established as CEO, pored over sales reports with a mixture of disbelief and unease. "These numbers can't be right," he murmured to his assistant. "We're selling more boards now than we did during the boom years." His assistant nodded, her face grim. "It's true, sir. People are spending their last dollars on Ouija boards. They're desperate for answers, for hope." Marcus leaned back in his chair, conflicting emotions warring within him. On one hand, the company's success meant jobs for hundreds of workers in a time when employment was scarce. On the other, the thought of profiting from people's desperation left a sour taste in his mouth. "Sir!" His assistant's voice broke into his thoughts. "There's something else we've been receiving. Unusual reports. People claiming they've received messages about hidden fortunes, long-lost relatives with inheritances. It's causing quite a stir." Marcus frowned, remembering William Fould's warnings about the cursed set of boards. "Are these reports concentrated in any particular area?" The assistant consulted her notes. "They seem to be following the route of a travelling carnival, sir, one that features a prominent Ouija attraction." A chill ran down Marcus's spine. He thought of William's fall, of the cryptic message he'd received on the night of his friend's death. What if the boards were more than just a novelty? What if they truly held some power, a power that was now spiraling out of control? "Book me a train ticket," he said abruptly. "I think it's time I paid a visit to this carnival." As his assistant hurried to comply, Marcus's gaze fell on the Ouija board that sat on a shelf behind his desk, the very one he'd used the night of William's death. In the fading light of the afternoon, he could have sworn he saw the planchette move, ever so slightly, of its own accord. The Great Depression had plunged the nation into darkness, but for the Ouija board, business was booming. As Marcus Holloway prepared to embark on a journey that would unravel the mysteries surrounding his friend's creation, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the precipice of something far larger and more terrifying than he could imagine. Across America, in farmhouses and tenements, in carnival tents and corporate offices, the Ouija boards continued their silent vigil, waiting, watching. And perhaps, in ways no one fully understood, shaping the desperate hopes and dreams of a nation in crisis. Chapter 9. Patience Worth's Pen. The parlour of the Curran home in St. Louis was awash in the golden glow of gaslight, casting long shadows across the floral wallpaper. Pearl Curran sat at a small table, her fingers resting lightly on the planchette of a Ouija board. Across from her, her friend Emily Hutchings watched with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "I still don't understand why you want to try this, Pearl," Emily said, her voice tinged with concern. "You've never shown any interest in spiritualism before." Pearl shrugged, a faint smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Call it a whim, Emily. With all the talk about these boards, I thought we might as well see what all the fuss is about." As they placed their fingers on the planchette, neither woman could have imagined the extraordinary journey they were about to embark upon. A journey that would challenge the boundaries of literature, spirituality, and the very nature of creativity itself. The planchette began to move, slowly at first, then with increasing confidence. Pearl called out the letters as they were indicated: MANYMOONSAGOILIVEDPATIENCEWORTHMYNAME. Emily gasped. "Patience Worth. Who is that?" Before Pearl could respond, the planchette was moving again, spelling out a message in an archaic dialect that seemed to flow through Pearl as if she were a vessel for some otherworldly force. "Across the sea of darkness and time I come, a soul set free to blend with thine. I lived, died, and lived again. My tongue is silent, my pen is still, but my soul hath words to spill." Pearl's eyes widened as the words tumbled from her lips. She felt a strange disconnection, as if she were both present in the room and somewhere else entirely. A place of mists and shadows where past and present intertwined. "Pearl," Emily's voice seemed to come from a great distance. "Pearl, are you all right?" With a shuddering gasp, Pearl returned fully to herself. She looked down at the Ouija board, then up at her friend, her face pale with wonder. "Emily," she whispered, "I think we've made contact with something. Someone extraordinary." In the days and weeks that followed, Pearl found herself increasingly drawn to the Ouija board. Patience Worth, the entity that claimed to be a 17th-century Englishwoman, began to pour forth a torrent of poetry, prose, and wisdom that left Pearl and Emily in awe. Word of the Patience Worth phenomenon spread quickly through St. Louis society. Soon the Curran home became a hub for intellectuals, spiritualists, and the simply curious, all eager to witness the miraculous communication. One evening, as Pearl sat at her usual place before the Ouija board, a distinguished-looking man cleared his throat from the back of the crowded parlour. "Mrs. Curran," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "I'm Dr. Walter Franklin Prince from the American Society for Psychical Research. I've come to investigate these communications." Pearl nodded, her face serene. "Of course, Dr. Prince. Patience and I welcome any and all scrutiny." As if on cue, the planchette began to move, and Pearl's voice took on the archaic cadence that had become familiar to her regular visitors. "Wise men seek, yet wisdom hides. The veil twixt worlds is thin yet strong. Look not with eyes alone, but with the heart's own sight." Dr. Prince leaned forward, his skepticism warring with fascination. "Remarkable," he murmured. "But surely, Mrs. Curran, you must have some explanation for this ability?" Pearl shook her head, her eyes clear and guileless. "I assure you, Dr. Prince, I'm as mystified as anyone. Before Patience came into my life, I had no interest in writing, no knowledge of 17th-century England. Everything you hear comes through me, but not from me." As the session continued, with Patience Worth dictating poetry and answering questions from the assembled guests, Dr. Prince watched closely, taking copious notes. He observed Pearl's rapid, almost trance-like delivery, the archaic language and historical details that seemed beyond her known education, and the consistent personality that shone through every communication. Later that night, after the guests had departed and Pearl sat alone in her study, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. From a simple housewife with little formal education, she had become the conduit for what many were calling a literary genius. She picked up one of the manuscripts that Patience had dictated, a novel set in the time of Christ, filled with rich historical detail and profound spiritual insights. How could she, Pearl Curran, have created this? And yet, if not her, then who or what was Patience Worth? As if in answer to her unspoken question, she felt a familiar urge to reach for pen and paper, without the Ouija board now. Words began to flow from her hand in a script that was not quite her own. Doubt not the wellspring of thy gift, dear heart. The veil is thin, and souls do dance between. What flows through thee is neither thine nor mine alone, but ours, a bridge twixt worlds, a song of spirit, sung in mortal key. Pearl stared at the words on the page, a chill running down her spine. Whatever the truth behind Patience Worth, whatever power the Ouija board had unlocked within her, she knew her life would never be the same. Miles away, in a cluttered office at Columbia University, Dr. James Hyslop, a leading researcher in psychical phenomena, pored over the latest reports of the Patience Worth case. His desk was piled high with transcripts of Pearl Curran's sessions, analyses of the archaic language used, and comparisons to known historical records. "It's unprecedented," he muttered to himself, scribbling notes in the margin of a particularly dense linguistic analysis. The consistency of the personality, the depth of historical knowledge, the literary quality. How can we explain it? A knock at his office door interrupted his musings. "Come in," he called, not looking up from his work. A young graduate student entered, carrying a stack of newspapers. "Dr. Hyslop, I thought you might want to see these. The Patience Worth story is spreading beyond St. Louis. It's causing quite a stir in literary circles." Hyslop took the papers, scanning the headlines with growing interest. Acclaimed author claims inspiration from Ouija board spirit. Patience Worth, a new Shakespeare. The supernatural in modern literature, Pearl Curran's enigma. He leaned back in his chair, stroking his beard thoughtfully. This case could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness, creativity, and the very nature of identity. But we must be cautious. The Ouija board. It's a powerful tool, but also a dangerous one. The graduate student nodded, his eyes bright with excitement. "What's our next step?" Professor Hyslop stood, his decision made. "Book us tickets to St. Louis. It's time we witness this phenomenon for ourselves. The Patience Worth case may well be the key to unlocking the mysteries of the human mind, and perhaps the door to realms beyond our own." As night fell over America, from the gaslit parlours of St. Louis to the hallowed halls of academia, the Ouija board continued its quiet revolution. In the hands of Pearl Curran and Patience Worth, it had become more than a tool for communicating with the dead. It was now a channel for literary creation, a bridge between worlds that challenged the very foundations of art, spirituality, and science. The age of Patience Worth had begun, and with it a new chapter in the dark and wondrous history of the Ouija board. Chapter 10. The Changing Light. The summer of 1955 hung heavy over Stonington, Connecticut, the air thick with salt and possibility. In a weathered Victorian house overlooking the harbour, James Merrill sat at his desk, surrounded by crumpled papers and half-empty coffee cups. The poet stared at the blank page before him, his pen hovering indecisively over the pristine surface. For weeks now, the words had refused to come. Merrill, already acclaimed for his lyrical mastery, found himself adrift in a sea of creative doubt. It was in this state of frustrated limbo that his partner, David Jackson, approached him with an unusual suggestion. "James," David said, his voice tinged with excitement, "I think I might have found something to help with your writer's block." Merrill turned, eyebrow raised skeptically. "Oh, and what miracle cure have you discovered?" David produced a flat rectangular box from behind his back. "It's called a Ouija board. They say it can connect you with something beyond ourselves." Merrill eyed the box warily. He had heard of these boards, of course, whispers of spiritualist gatherings and parlour tricks. But he was a man of letters, of carefully crafted verses. What use could he possibly have for such a device? And yet, as David set up the board on the coffee table, Merrill felt a strange pull. The polished wood gleamed in the afternoon light, the letters and numbers arranged in neat rows, promising answers to unasked questions. "Shall we give it a try?" David asked, his fingers already resting lightly on the heart-shaped planchette. Merrill hesitated for a moment, then joined his partner at the table. "I suppose it can't hurt," he murmured, placing his own fingers on the wooden pointer. Neither man could have imagined that this simple act would be the beginning of a decades-long odyssey, a journey that would produce one of the most ambitious and enigmatic poems of the 20th century. As their fingers touched the planchette, Merrill felt a strange tingling sensation, as if a mild electric current were passing through his body. The pointer began to move, slowly at first, then with increasing confidence. Welcome James David Merrill's eyes widened. "Did you?" David shook his head, his face a mixture of awe and apprehension. "I didn't move it. Did you?" Before Merrill could respond, the planchette was moving again, spelling out a message that would haunt him for years to come. "The changing light at Sandover. The changing light at Sandover," Merrill whispered, the phrase resonating in his mind like the first line of a poem he hadn't known he was waiting to write. From that moment on, James Merrill's life and work were irrevocably altered. Night after night, he and David returned to the Ouija board, communing with entities that identified themselves as long-dead friends, mythical beings, and even archangels. The messages that flowed through the board were by turns profound, cryptic, and deeply personal. Merrill found himself transcribing vast cosmologies, intimate confessions, and sweeping visions of history and fate. One evening, as they sat before the board in what had become their nightly ritual, a new presence made itself known. "I am Ephraim 1585 to 1631. Poetan scribet to Thico Urtefeven." Merrill's pen flew across the page, struggling to keep up with the torrent of archaic language and startling imagery that poured forth. Ephraim, it seemed, was to be his guide through the labyrinthine realms of the afterlife. As the weeks turned to months and months to years, the changing light at Sandover began to take shape. It was unlike anything Merrill had ever written, a sprawling epic that blended mythology, personal history, and metaphysical speculation into a dazzling tapestry of verse. But the process was not without its costs. Merrill found himself increasingly consumed by the world revealed through the Ouija board. He neglected other writing projects, strained relationships with friends who couldn't understand his obsession, and at times questioned his own sanity. One night, after a particularly intense session that had left him physically and emotionally drained, Merrill confided in David. "What if we're not channeling spirits at all?" he asked, his voice hoarse from hours of recitation. "What if this is all coming from some dark corner of my own mind?" David considered this for a moment, then replied softly, "Does it matter? Look at what you're creating, James. Whether it's spirits or your subconscious, the poetry is real." Merrill nodded, but the question continued to gnaw at him. He thought of Pearl Curran and Patience Worth, wondering if they had grappled with the same doubts, the same fears of delusion or fraud. As word of Merrill's unorthodox method of composition began to spread through literary circles, he found himself the subject of both fascination and skepticism. Critics praised the ambition and complexity of his growing opus, while others dismissed it as an elaborate hoax or the product of a mind unhinged. Dr. Amelia Hoffman, a professor of literature at Yale and a long-time admirer of Merrill's work, requested a meeting with a poet. In her book-lined office, she leaned forward, her eyes sharp behind horn-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Merrill," she began, "your new work is extraordinary. But I must ask, do you truly believe you're communicating with the dead?" Merrill smiled enigmatically. "Belief, Dr. Hoffman, is a complicated thing. What I can tell you is that the board has given me access to a well of creativity I never knew I possessed. Whether that well is fed by spirits or by the depths of my own psyche, I leave to scholars like yourself to debate." As he left the campus, Merrill's mind wandered back to the Ouija board waiting for him at home. He knew that Ephraim and the other entities, real or imagined, would be there, ready to continue their grand narrative. The sun was setting over New Haven, casting long shadows across the Gothic architecture of Yale. Merrill paused, struck by the play of light and shadow. "The changing light," he murmured, feeling the familiar stirring of verses taking shape in his mind. He hurried home, eager to return to the board, to Ephraim, to the vast cosmic drama unfolding through his pen. The changing light at Sandover was far from complete, but James Merrill knew that he had embarked on the greatest adventure of his literary life, a journey that would challenge not only his art, but his very understanding of reality and imagination. As night fell over Stonington, Merrill sat once more before the Ouija board, his fingers trembling slightly as they touched the planchette. In the dim light of his study, the poet prepared to pierce the veil between worlds, to bring back verses that would blur the lines between the living and the dead, between inspiration and possession. The Ouija board, that simple wooden device, had become his portal to realms unknown. And, as the planchette began to move, spelling out the first words of the night's session, James Merrill felt the familiar thrill of stepping into the unknown, guided by unseen hands and voices from beyond. Chapter 11. Words from beyond the musty air of the antiquarian bookshop in Greenwich Village hung heavy with the scent of old paper and forgotten dreams. Dr. Evelyn Price, a renowned literary historian, ran her fingers along the spines of leather-bound volumes, her eyes scanning for anything unusual. She had come here following a rumour, a whisper of a lost masterpiece that had haunted the fringes of literary circles for decades. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with eyes that seemed to hold secrets of their own, approached her cautiously. "Can I help you find something, Professor Price?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn turned, a wry smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Perhaps, Mr. Thorne, I'm looking for information on what some call the lost Ouija opus. Have you heard of it?" Thorne's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He glanced around the empty shop before leaning in close. "Follow me," he murmured, leading her to a back room cluttered with stacks of unsorted books and manuscripts. From a locked drawer, he produced a thin, leather-bound journal. "This belonged to a writer named Marcus Eilerson," Thorne explained, his voice trembling slightly. "He claimed to have channeled an entire novel through a Ouija board in 1938. But the manuscript itself, it vanished shortly after his death." Evelyn's heart raced as she carefully opened the journal. Inside, she found frantic scribblings, diagrams of Ouija board sessions, and tantalizing fragments of what appeared to be breathtakingly beautiful prose. One passage caught her eye. "The words come not from me, but through me, a cosmic symphony of language, each sentence a portal to realms beyond mortal ken. But with each session I feel myself slipping away, becoming a vessel for something vast and terrifying and beautiful." As Evelyn delved deeper into Marcus Eilerson's journal, she felt a chill run down her spine. The lost Ouija opus, it seemed, was more than just a literary curiosity. It was a key to understanding the true power of the Ouija board and its influence on human creativity. Meanwhile, in a bustling New York publishing house, editor Sarah Langley was facing a dilemma. The manuscript on her desk, a novel purportedly inspired by Ouija board sessions, had become the talk of the industry. Its author, a previously unknown writer named Daniel Foster, claimed that every word had been dictated to him by spirits through the board. The prose was unlike anything Sarah had ever encountered, lyrical, haunting, and filled with insights that seemed to transcend human understanding. But as she read, she couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. There was something familiar about the style, echoes of other Ouija-inspired works she had studied. Sarah picked up her phone, her fingers hesitating over the keypad before dialing a number she had sworn she would never use again. "Hello, this is Dr. James Sullivan," a gruff voice answered. Sarah took a deep breath. "James, it's Sarah. I know we agreed not to contact each other after." "Well, after what happened. But I need your expertise. It's about the Ouija board phenomenon in literature." There was a long pause before James responded, his voice tight with emotion. "I thought I'd left that part of my life behind, Sarah. You know how dangerous this research can be." "I know," Sarah said softly, "but this manuscript, James, I think it might be connected to the lost Ouija opus. We need to investigate." Another pause, then a heavy sigh. "Send me what you have, and Sarah, be careful. The last time we delved into this, we nearly lost everything." As Sarah hung up the phone, she couldn't help but shudder at the memory of their previous encounter with Ouija-inspired literature. The séance that had gone horribly wrong, the weeks of nightmares that followed, the feeling that something had followed them back from the other side. She shook her head, forcing herself to focus on the task at hand. Whatever the risks, the world needed to know the truth about the lost Ouija opus and its influence on modern literature. Across the country, in a small college town in Oregon, Professor Alan Thornton was preparing for his lecture on the Ouija board in popular culture. As he organized his notes, he marveled at how deeply the simple wooden board had embedded itself in the American psyche. From the Patience Worth phenomenon to James Merrill's epic poetry, from pulp horror novels to serious literary works, the Ouija board had left an indelible mark on the creative landscape. And now, with the rise of online communities and social media, its influence was spreading faster than ever. Alan pulled up a PowerPoint slide showing a graph of Ouija board mentions in literature over the past century. The spike in recent years was unmistakable. "But why?" he murmured to himself. "What is it about this board that continues to captivate us?" As if in answer to his question, a student burst into the lecture hall, out of breath and wide-eyed with excitement. "Professor Thornton," she gasped, "you have to see this. Someone just posted online claiming to have found a copy of the lost Ouija opus." Alan's heart skipped a beat. If this was true, it could revolutionize the field of literary studies and shed new light on the Ouija board's role in artistic creation. "Show me," he said, his lecture forgotten as he followed the student out of the hall and into a world of swirling rumors and tantalizing possibilities. As night fell across America, these disparate threads began to weave together into a tapestry of mystery and revelation. Dr. Evelyn Price pored over Marcus Eilerson's journal, searching for clues to the whereabouts of the lost manuscript. Sarah Langley and Dr. James Sullivan rekindled their uneasy partnership, determined to uncover the truth behind Daniel Foster's Ouija-inspired novel. And Professor Alan Thornton found himself at the center of a growing online storm as word of the lost Ouija opus spread like wildfire through social media. In homes and dorm rooms, in coffee shops and libraries, people gathered around Ouija boards, drawn by the allure of communicating with the beyond. Some sought literary inspiration, others hunted for clues to the lost masterpiece, and still others simply yearned for a connection to something greater than themselves. But as the planchettes moved and the messages flowed, a shadow seemed to fall across the land. For in opening these channels to the unknown, humanity had invited not just inspiration, but something darker. A force that had waited patiently for decades, biding its time until the veil between worlds grew thin enough to breach. The lost Ouija opus was more than just a book. It was a key, a portal, a harbinger of things to come. And as the search for it intensified, the line between fiction and reality, between the living and the dead, began to blur in ways that would change the world forever. In the ethereal space between waking and dreaming, words whispered across the collective unconscious of a nation obsessed. The book is found, the door is opened. The changing light at Sandover was but a glimmer. Now the true illumination begins. Chapter 12. The Thornton Experiment. The fluorescent lights of the laboratory hummed softly, casting a stark glow over the array of scientific equipment. Dr. Samuel Thornton adjusted his glasses, his eyes fixed on the monitor before him. On the screen, a real-time EEG readout flickered and pulsed, tracing the brainwaves of the subject in the adjacent room. Through the one-way mirror, Thornton could see a young woman, her fingers resting lightly on a Ouija board's planchette. Electrodes snaked from her scalp, connecting her to the machines that surrounded her like silent sentinels. "Begin the session," Thornton spoke into the intercom, his voice steady despite the anticipation that thrummed through his veins. As the woman closed her eyes and began to ask questions of the board, Thornton watched the EEG readout intently. For years, he had been developing a systematic approach to studying the Ouija phenomenon, and this experiment was the culmination of his work. Suddenly, the lines on the screen began to shift dramatically. Thornton leaned forward, his breath catching in his throat. The woman's brainwaves were displaying patterns he had never seen before, not in sleep, not in meditation, not in any altered state he had previously documented. "Dr. Thornton," his assistant whispered, pointing to another monitor, "look at the electromagnetic readings in the room." Thornton's eyes widened as he took in the data. The EM fluctuations were off the charts, pulsing in an eerily synchronized rhythm with the subject's brainwaves. "It's happening again," he murmured, more to himself than to his assistant, "just like in the Parsons trial." As the session continued, Thornton furiously scribbled notes, his mind racing to interpret the data streaming in from multiple sources. This was far beyond anything he had hypothesized when he first proposed the Thornton scale, a method for measuring and categorizing Ouija board experiences on a spectrum from purely psychological to potentially supernatural. The intercom crackled to life, the subject's voice trembling with emotion. "Dr. Thornton, I think you need to see this." Thornton rushed into the testing room, his assistant close on his heels. The young woman was staring at the Ouija board, her face pale with shock. There, spelled out on the board, was a message that made Thornton's blood run cold. "We have been waiting for you, Samuel. How?" Thornton stammered, his scientific detachment crumbling. "How could it know my name?" The planchette began to move again, seemingly of its own accord. The subject snatched her hands away, but the wooden pointer continued its eerie dance across the board. "Your scale cannot measure us." Thornton stumbled backward, his mind reeling. In all his years of research, he had never encountered anything like this. He had always believed there was a rational explanation for the Ouija phenomenon, ideomotor responses, subconscious manipulation, maybe even some form of collective unconscious at work. But this defied all logical explanation. As the implications of what he had witnessed began to sink in, Thornton felt the foundations of his scientific worldview beginning to crumble. If the Ouija board could truly access knowledge beyond the participants' awareness, if it could manipulate energy fields in measurable ways, what did that mean for our understanding of consciousness, of reality itself? Across the country, in a dimly lit basement office at the University of California, Berkeley, Dr. Elizabeth Chen pored over the latest batch of data from Thornton's experiments. As one of the few academics willing to take the Ouija phenomenon seriously, she had been corresponding with Thornton for months, helping to refine his methodologies and analyze his results. But the readings from this latest session were like nothing she had ever seen. The brainwave patterns, the EM fluctuations, the inexplicable access to information. It all pointed to something far beyond current scientific understanding. Elizabeth's fingers flew across her keyboard, composing an urgent email to her colleague. "Sam, I've reviewed the data from experiment 17. I don't know how to say this without sounding like I've lost my scientific mind, but I think we may be on the verge of proving the existence of non-local consciousness. The implications are staggering. We need to expand the study. I'm proposing a multi-site, double-blind trial using your Thornton scale as a baseline. We'll need funding, of course, and a team we can trust. This could change everything, Sam, but we need to be careful. If this gets out before we have irrefutable proof, we'll be laughed out of academia. And there's something else. I can't shake the feeling that we're dealing with forces we don't fully understand, forces that might not want to be understood. Call me as soon as you get this. We have a lot to discuss." Liz, as Elizabeth hit send, a chill ran down her spine. She couldn't help but feel that they were standing on the precipice of something monumental, a discovery that could bridge the gap between science and spirituality, between the known and the unknowable. But with that excitement came a growing sense of unease. If the Ouija board was truly a window to another realm, who or what was looking back through that window? And what would happen if they opened that window too wide? Meanwhile, in a lavish corner office high above Manhattan, Michael Forsyth, CEO of Elysium Industries, listened intently as his head of R&D explained the potential applications of Thornton's research. "Think about it, sir," Dr. Amelia Reeves said, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "If we could harness this energy, tap into this non-local consciousness, the possibilities are endless. Enhanced cognitive function, direct brain-computer interfaces, maybe even a form of technological immortality." Forsyth leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "And you're certain this Thornton fellow is onto something real? This isn't just another bunch of crackpots chasing ghosts." Reeves shook her head emphatically. "The data is solid, sir. Thornton is a respected neurologist, and our own preliminary tests have corroborated his findings. This is real." A slow smile spread across Forsyth's face. "Then we need to move quickly. I want exclusive rights to this technology, whatever it takes, money, resources, legal muscle. Make it happen." As Reeves hurried out to set things in motion, Forsyth turned to gaze out at the city sprawled below. Soon, he thought, all of this would be transformed. A new age of human potential was dawning, and Elysium Industries would be at its forefront. But in his haste to seize the future, Forsyth failed to consider the warnings etched into the very history of the Ouija board. The cautionary tales of those who had sought to harness its power, only to find themselves caught in forces beyond their control. As night fell over the city, the pieces were being set in motion for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of science, spirituality, and the very nature of reality. The Thornton scale, intended as a tool for understanding, was about to become the catalyst for a chain of events that would blur the lines between this world and the next. And somewhere in the spaces between, the entities that had long communicated through the Ouija board watched and waited, knowing that their time was drawing near. Chapter 13. The Zozo Incident. The suburban home in Tulsa, Oklahoma, was unremarkable from the outside. But inside, in a dimly lit basement, 3 teenagers huddled around a Ouija board, their fingers trembling on the planchette. Jessica, the oldest at 17, took a deep breath before speaking. "Is anyone there?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The planchette began to move, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. Zio-zio-zo-zo. Michael, Jessica's younger brother, frowned. "What kind of name is that?" Before anyone could respond, the planchette flew across the board, spelling out a message that made their blood run cold. "ISEYOU." The lights flickered, and a cold breeze seemed to sweep through the room despite the closed windows. The teens exchanged nervous glances, but curiosity overcame their fear. "What are you?" Jessica asked, her voice shaking. The response came swiftly. DEMON. Suddenly the planchette began to move with violent erratic motions, spelling out a stream of obscenities and threats. The temperature in the room plummeted, and a low guttural growl seemed to emanate from the board itself. Panicking, the teens tried to end the session, but the planchette refused to move to goodbye. It wasn't until Jessica's mother, hearing the commotion, burst into the room and snatched the board away that the terrifying experience finally ended. But for Jessica, Michael, and their friend, the nightmare was just beginning. Across the country, in a small apartment in Brooklyn, paranormal investigator Darren Chase sat at his computer, scrolling through an endless stream of emails. Ever since he'd started his blog documenting Ouija board experiences, he'd been inundated with stories from across the globe. But lately a disturbing pattern had emerged. "Zozo again," he muttered, opening yet another email describing an encounter with the mysterious entity. "What are you?" Darren had been tracking the Zozo phenomenon for months. The entity seemed to appear in Ouija sessions across the country, always bringing with it a sense of dread and often leaving lasting psychological scars on those who encountered it. As he compiled the latest reports, a notification popped up on his screen. It was a message from Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the Berkeley researcher he'd been corresponding with about the scientific studies of the Ouija board. "Darren, I hope this email finds you well. I've been following your work on the Zozo phenomenon with great interest. I believe there might be a connection between these incidents and the anomalous readings we've been getting in our lab studies. Would you be willing to share your data? Perhaps together we can shed some light on what's really happening. Best regards, Dr. Elizabeth Chen." Darren leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his dishevelled hair. The idea of collaborating with a respected academic was tempting, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were dealing with forces far beyond their understanding. His gaze fell on the Ouija board sitting on a shelf across the room. He'd acquired it from a woman in New Orleans who claimed it was haunted. Darren had always been skeptical of such claims, but now, with a sense of trepidation, he reached for the board. In a luxurious office suite in downtown Chicago, Elysium Industries' new paranormal research division was a hive of activity. Dr. Amelia Reeves stood before a wall of monitors, each displaying data from Ouija sessions being conducted across the country. "Report," she barked, turning to a nervous-looking assistant. "Ma'am, we're seeing a 200% increase in Zozo encounters over the past month," the young man said, handing her a tablet. "And the energy readings. They're off the charts." Amelia swiped through the data, her excitement growing with each graph and chart. This was exactly what they needed to convince the board to increase funding for their projects. "What about the Thorne scale readings?" she asked. The assistant hesitated. That's the strange thing, Dr. Reeves. The readings are consistently higher than anything Dr. Thornton documented in his original research. It's as if the phenomenon is evolving, becoming stronger." Amelia's eyes gleamed with a mixture of scientific curiosity and something darker. "Excellent. Schedule a meeting with Mr. Forsyth. I think it's time we move to the next phase of our experiments." As the assistant hurried off, Amelia turned back to the monitors. On one screen, a session in progress caught her eye. The participants were visibly distressed, and the planchette was moving with impossible speed. She leaned in, watching intently as the message unfolded. "WEARELEGION, WEARECOMING. A chill ran down Amelia's spine, but she quickly pushed the feeling aside. They were on the verge of a breakthrough, and nothing, not fear, not ethics, not the warnings of history, would stand in their way. Back in Tulsa, Jessica sat on her bed, hugging her knees to her chest. It had been a week since the Zozo incident, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Strange occurrences plagued the house, objects moving on their own, whispers in empty rooms, and most disturbing of all, the scratches that had appeared on Michael's back in the middle of the night. Her parents had called in a local priest, but his prayers and blessings seemed to have little effect. If anything, the activity had intensified. Jessica's phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "It's in my room. Help?" Heart pounding, Jessica crept down the hall to her brother's room. She found Michael huddled in a corner, pointing with a shaking hand at his desk. There, bathed in a pool of moonlight, sat the Ouija board they thought their mother had thrown away. The planchette was moving on its own, spelling out a message that made Jessica's blood turn to ice, WELCOMEHOME, as a low, rumbling laugh seemed to fill the room. Jessica realized with growing horror that their innocent game had opened a door, and now something was coming through. Across America, as more and more people fell under the thrall of the Zozo phenomenon, the veil between worlds grew thinner. In laboratories and corporate boardrooms, in suburban basements and city apartments, the Ouija board was no longer just a game. It had become a battleground in a war between realms, with humanity caught in the crossfire. And Zozo, whatever it truly was only the beginning. Chapter 14, Hollywood Haunting the Clapperboard, snapped shut with a sharp crack. Ouija Doorway to the Dead, Scene 27, Take 3. Action. Director Alexis Reeves watched intently as the actors moved through the dimly lit set, a perfect recreation of a 1920s séance parlor. The camera panned across the fearful faces gathered around the Ouija board, settling on the lead actress, Mia Chen, as she placed her fingers on the planchette. "Is anyone there?" Mia's character whispered, her voice trembling with perfectly rehearsed fear. Suddenly the lights on set flickered, and a cold breeze swept through the studio. The planchette beneath Mia's fingers jerked violently, moving of its own accord. "Cut!" Alexis shouted, but the planchette continued to move, spelling out a message that wasn't in the script. ZOZOISHERE. Mia snatched her hands away, her scripted fear giving way to genuine panic. What the hell was that? Alexis rushed onto the set, her face pale. "Okay, everyone take 5. Tech team, check the special effects board." That wasn't supposed to happen. As the crew dispersed, whispering nervously among themselves, Alexis pulled her assistant director aside. "Jake, tell me you set that up as a prank." Jake shook his head, his eyes wide. "No way, Alexis, that was." "I don't know what that was." Alexis ran a hand through her hair, trying to quell the unease rising in her stomach. This wasn't the first strange occurrence on set since they'd begun filming Ouija Doorway to the Dead. Props had gone missing, lights exploded without warning, and more than one crew member had complained of feeling watched when alone on set. She dismissed it all as nerves, the result of working long hours on a horror film. But now, "Get me Walter from the props department," she said to Jake. "I want to know exactly where he got that Ouija board." In his trailer, lead actor Ryan Garrett sat before a mirror, his eyes fixed on the jagged scratches that had appeared on his chest overnight. They formed a distinct pattern, ZOZO. A knock at the door made him jump. "5 minutes, Mr. Garrett," a production assistant called. "Be right there," Ryan responded, his voice hoarse. He quickly buttoned his shirt, hiding the marks. As he stood to leave, his gaze fell on the Ouija board sitting in the corner of his trailer, a personal prop he'd been using to get into character. The planchette twitched slightly, as if beckoning him. Ryan shuddered and hurried out, trying to shake the feeling that something was following him. Back in her office, Alexis pored over the day's footage, searching for any explanation for the bizarre incident on set. As she watched the scene play out on her monitor, she noticed something in the background, barely visible in the shadows behind the actors. She leaned in, squinting at the screen. There, in the corner of the frame, was a figure, tall, emaciated, with glowing eyes that seemed to stare directly into the camera. A figure that hadn't been there during filming. Alexis's blood ran cold. She reached for her phone with trembling fingers, scrolling through her contacts until she found the number she needed. It rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. "Darren Chase speaking. Mr. Chase, this is Alexis Reeves. I'm directing a film about the Ouija board, and I think we might need your expertise. Thousands of miles away, in a cluttered office at Miskatonic University. Professor Alan Thornton received an urgent email from his colleague, Dr. Elizabeth Chen. Alan, I hope this email finds you well. I've just been contacted by a Hollywood director working on a Ouija board film. Apparently they're experiencing some unusual phenomena on set. Given your expertise in the cultural impact of the Ouija board, I thought you might be interested in investigating. This could be an opportunity to observe the intersection of the Ouija phenomenon with popular culture in real time. Plus, if there's any truth to these alleged hauntings, it could provide valuable data for our ongoing research. Let me know if you're interested, and I'll put you in touch with the director. Best." Elizabeth Allen leaned back in his chair, stroking his beard thoughtfully. He'd always been skeptical of Hollywood's sensationalized portrayal of the Ouija board. But if there was even a chance that something genuine was occurring on that film set, he began composing his reply, his mind already racing with the possibilities. On the outskirts of Los Angeles, in a nondescript warehouse that served as Elysium Industries' West Coast facility, Michael Forsyth reviewed the latest reports from his team embedded in the film's production. "So, our little experiment is yielding results," he mused, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Dr. Amelia Reeves nodded, her excitement barely contained. "The modified Ouija board we provided to the props department is performing beyond our expectations. The energy readings from the set are off the charts." Forsyth's eyes gleamed with ambition. "Excellent! And the subliminal messaging we embedded in the script." "Already having an effect," Reeves confirmed. "Social media chatter about Zozo has increased tenfold since filming began. We're priming the public consciousness on a massive scale." Forsyth stood, walking to the window that overlooked the sprawling city below. "Soon the veil will be thin enough for our true work to begin. And when it does—" He trailed off, lost in visions of power beyond mortal ken. Behind him, unnoticed, the screen of Reeves's tablet flickered. For a moment a face appeared, gaunt, terrifying, with eyes that burned with otherworldly malevolence. Then it was gone, leaving behind a single word, SOON. As night fell over Hollywood, the set of Ouija Doorway to the Dead stood silent and empty. But in the darkness, something stirred. The Ouija board used in filming began to glow with a faint eldritch light. The planchette moved, tracing out words that hung in the air like smoke. THEDOORISOPENING. In homes across America, viewers watched trailers for the upcoming film, unaware that the lines between fiction and reality were blurring. The Ouija board, once a simple parlor game, had become a conduit for forces beyond human comprehension. And as the release date for Ouija Doorway to the Dead drew near, those forces prepared to step through the silver screen and into our world. The stage was set for a convergence of science, spiritualism, and cinema, a perfect storm that would shake the foundations of reality itself. Chapter: The Benton City Murders. The small town of Benton City, Washington, was the kind of place where nothing ever happened. That changed on a crisp autumn morning when the bodies of Harry and Nicola Fuller were discovered in their modest ranch-style home, victims of a brutal double homicide that would shake the community to its core. Detective Sarah Chen stood in the Fullers' living room, her dark eyes scanning the crime scene. Blood spattered the walls in an almost artistic pattern, and overturned furniture spoke of a violent struggle. But it was the object at the center of the room that drew her attention, a Ouija board, its planchette still resting on the letter Z. "What have we got?" Sarah asked the forensic technician who was carefully photographing the scene. "Victims are Harry Fuller, 42, and his wife Nicola, 39, the tech replied, not looking up from his camera. Cause of death appears to be multiple stab wounds. Time of death estimated between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. last night." Sarah nodded, jotting notes in her worn leather notebook. "Any signs of forced entry? None that we've found. Looks like they knew their killer." As Sarah continued her examination of the scene, a chill ran down her spine. Something about this felt off. It wasn't just the brutality of the crime, but a sense of wrongness that permeated the air, as if the very walls of the house were whispering dark secrets. Her gaze kept returning to the Ouija board. Why had the killers left it out? Was it part of some twisted game or something more sinister? A commotion at the front door drew her attention. A young man in his early 20s was arguing with one of the uniformed officers, his face a mask of anguish. "That's my parents in there. You have to let me in." Sarah approached, her voice calm but authoritative. "I'm Detective Chen." "And you are?" "Stephen Fuller," the young man replied, his voice breaking. "Harry and Nicola, they're my parents. Please, what happened to them?" Sarah's heart sank. Breaking news to family members was never easy, but there was something in Stephen's eyes, a mix of grief and, was that guilt? That set her investigators' instincts on edge. "I'm sorry, Mr. Fuller, but I'm afraid I have some bad news." Hours later, Sarah sat at her desk in the Benton City Police Department, surrounded by crime scene photos and preliminary reports. She rubbed her temples, trying to make sense of the conflicting evidence. The Fullers had no known enemies. They were well liked in the community, active in their church, and by all accounts, a happy couple. Yet someone had entered their home and brutally murdered them. And then there was the Ouija board. Initial forensics had come back. The only fingerprints on it belonged to the victims and their son, Stephen. But why was it out? According to Stephen's statement, his parents weren't interested in the occult or spiritualism. Sarah's phone buzzed, startling her from her thoughts. It was a text from her partner, Detective Mike Rawlins. "You need to see this." News just broke about a triple homicide in Portland. Victims found with a Ouija board at the scene. Connection. Sarah's blood ran cold. One Ouija board at a murder scene could be coincidence. Two, in neighboring states within days of each other. That was a pattern. She quickly dialed Mike's number. "I'm on my way in. Get me everything you can on the Portland case. And Mike, let's keep this quiet for now. If word gets out that we might have a serial killer on our hands." "Got it," Mike replied. "I'll have a full briefing ready when you get here." As Sarah grabbed her coat and headed for the door, her mind raced. What was the connection between these murders and the Ouija board? Was it merely a sick calling card, or was there something more at play? She thought of her grandfather, a man who had spent his life investigating the unexplained. He had always warned her about the dangers of meddling with forces beyond human understanding. At the time, she had dismissed his stories as the ramblings of an old man. Now, faced with a case that defied logical explanation, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if there was some truth to her grandfather's warnings. Across the country, in his Brooklyn apartment, Darren Chase was updating his blog with the latest Ouija-related incidents when a news alert popped up on his screen. His eyes widened as he read the headline, "Double Murder in Washington State Linked to Ouija Board." Darren's fingers flew across the keyboard, searching for more information. As he read about the Benton City murders and the similar case in Portland, a sick feeling grew in the pit of his stomach. This was exactly the kind of escalation he had feared. The Zozo entity, or whatever force was behind these Ouija phenomena, was growing stronger, more violent. He reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the number he needed. It rang several times before a tired voice answered. "Dr. Chen." "It's Darren Chase. I'm sorry to call so late, but I think we have a serious problem." In the Elysium Industries facility, Amelia Reeves stared at the monitors displaying news coverage of the Benton City murders. Her face was a mask of concern, but her eyes gleamed with an unsettling excitement. "This is unexpected," she murmured to herself, "but not entirely unwelcome." She picked up her secure phone, dialing a number known to only a select few. "Mr. Forsyth, we may need to accelerate our timeline. The veil is thinning faster than we anticipated and, well, sir, I believe our friends on the other side are getting impatient." As she listened to Forsyth's response, Amelia's gaze fell on a small Ouija board sitting on her desk. The planchette began to move, seemingly of its own accord, spelling out a message that made even her cold blood run colder. THEHARVESTBEGINS. Amelia ended the call, her mind racing. They had set something in motion, something that was quickly spiraling out of control. But as fear gripped her heart, she couldn't help but feel a thrill of anticipation. After all, you can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs. And if a few lives had to be sacrificed to usher in a new age of human evolution, well, that was a price Amelia Reeves was willing to pay. As night fell over Benton City, Detective Sarah Chen pored over case files, unaware that she was standing on the precipice of a mystery that would challenge not only her investigative skills, but her very understanding of reality. The Ouija board murders were just the beginning, and the true horror was yet to come. Chapter 16. The Tucker tragedy. The Tucker family home in suburban Cleveland had always been a place of warmth and laughter. But on a chilly October evening, it became the stage for a nightmare that would haunt the community for years to come. Joshua Tucker, a bright and popular high school senior, sat alone in his dimly lit bedroom, his fingers resting lightly on the planchette of a Ouija board. The board had been a gag gift for his 18th birthday, but over the past few weeks it had become an obsession. "Is anyone there?" Joshua whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The planchette began to move, slowly at first, then with increasing speed and urgency. I-A-M-H-E-R-E. Joshua's heart raced. He had communicated with spirits before, or at least he thought he had. But something felt different this time. The air in the room seemed to thicken, and he could have sworn he heard a faint whisper just beyond the edge of hearing. "Who are you?" he asked, his mouth dry. The response came swiftly, "Yourdstiny." What followed was a 45-minute conversation that would change Joshua's life forever. The entity claiming to speak through the board revealed secrets Joshua had never told anyone, dredged up long-buried family traumas, and painted a picture of a world beyond the veil that was both terrifying and alluring. As the minutes ticked by, Joshua's parents, Sarah and Robert, grew increasingly concerned by the strange noises coming from their son's room. When they knocked on the door, they were met with silence. "Joshua!" Sarah called, worry etching her voice. "Is everything okay?" No response. Robert tried the door, finding it locked. "Joshua, open this door right now." Inside the room, Joshua barely registered his parents' voices. His entire being was focused on the board, on the entity that was revealing to him the secrets of the universe and of his own soul. The planchette moved with inhuman speed, spelling out messages faster than Joshua could fully comprehend.
YOUARECOSENTHINLETTEMEIN. "Yes," Joshua murmured, his eyes glazed over.
"Yes, I'll let you in." Outside, Robert's patience had run out. With a powerful kick, he broke down the door, only to recoil in horror at the scene before him. Joshua sat cross-legged on the floor, the Ouija board in front of him. But it was his son's face that made Robert's blood run cold. Joshua's eyes were rolled back in his head, showing only the whites, and a rictus grin stretched his features into an inhuman mask. "Oh my God!" Sarah gasped from behind her husband. "Joshua." As if triggered by his mother's voice, Joshua's head snapped towards his parents. When he spoke, it was in a voice that was not his own, a deep, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the room. "Joshua is gone," the thing wearing their son's face snarled. "I am Legion, for we are many." What happened next would be the subject of debate, speculation, and nightmares for years to come. In the space of a few terrifying minutes, Joshua, or the thing controlling him, displayed feats of strength and knowledge that defied explanation. He spoke in languages he had never learned, revealed secrets his parents had never told him, and at one point seemed to levitate several inches off the ground. It took 3 police officers and a paramedic to finally subdue Joshua, who fought with supernatural strength, all the while spewing a stream of obscenities and blasphemies that made even the hardened first responders blanch. As Joshua was strapped to a gurney and loaded into an ambulance, his mother clutching his hand and weeping, Detective Sarah Chen arrived on the scene. She had been following the string of Ouija-related incidents across the country, and the call about the Tucker boy had set off alarm bells. "What happened here?" she asked the shaken Robert Tucker. Robert shook his head, his eyes haunted. I don't know. It was like something out of a horror movie. That thing wasn't my son."
Sarah's gaze fell on the Ouija board, still lying on Joshua's bedroom floor.
She approached it cautiously, noting the scorch marks on the wood, as if it had been subjected to intense heat. As she knelt to examine it more closely, she felt a static charge in the air. The planchette twitched ever so slightly, and for a moment Sarah could have sworn she heard a whisper, "You're next." She recoiled, her heart pounding. This was beyond anything she had encountered in her years on the force. Whatever was happening, whatever force was at work, it was clear that the Ouija board was more than just a game. It was a doorway, and something dark and ancient had just stepped through. Miles away in his Brooklyn apartment, Darren Chase jolted awake, drenched in cold sweat. He had been dreaming of a boy with white eyes and a demon's grin, of a Ouija board that burned with hellfire. His phone buzzed insistently. It was a text from Dr. Elizabeth Chen. "Darren, have you seen the news about the Tucker boy in Cleveland? This is escalating faster than we thought. We need to meet. Bringing in Dr. Thornton. This is bigger than all of us." Darren's fingers hovered over the keypad, a reply forming in his mind. But before he could respond, his computer screen flicked to life of its own accord. A message appeared, letter by letter, as if typed by invisible hands, THEHARVESTISNEAR. In that moment, Darren knew that the battle they had been preparing for was no longer coming. It was already here. In the sterile confines of a psychiatric ward, Joshua Tucker stared at the ceiling, his eyes vacant, his lips moving in a silent litany. The doctors had diagnosed him with acute psychosis, but the orderlies whispered about possession and exorcisms. And in the quiet hours of the night, when the hospital corridors were at their darkest, Joshua would sometimes smile. A terrible, knowing smile that made even the most hardened staff members quicken their steps as they passed his room. For Joshua knew something they didn't. The conversation wasn't over. It had only just begun. Chapter 17, Digital Demons.
Jake Martinez adjusted his webcam, his heart racing with a mixture of excitement and trepidation.
At 19, he was already a rising star in the world of online content creation, known for his daring stunts and paranormal challenges. But tonight's livestream would be different. Tonight, he was going to push the boundaries further than ever before. "What's up, demon hunters?" Jake grinned into the camera, his trademark enthusiasm masking his nerves. "Tonight, we're taking the Ouija challenge to the next level. No more cardboard boards or cheap plastic planchettes. We're going old school." He panned the camera to reveal an antique Ouija board, its wood dark with age, the letters faintly luminous in the dim light of his bedroom. "This bad boy right here. It's over 100 years old, and rumor has it, it's cursed. Are you ready to see what kind of spirits we can conjure up?" The chat exploded with excitement, viewers from around the world tuning in to witness Jake's latest adventure. As the view count climbed into the thousands, Jake placed his fingers on the planchette. "All right, spirits," he called out, his voice taking on a theatrical tone. "If you're out there, give us a sign. Move this planchette and spell out a message for all our viewers." For a long moment, nothing happened. Jake was about to make a joke about shy ghosts when suddenly the planchette jerked violently under his fingers. Z-O-Z-O, Jake's eyes widened. He hadn't pushed it, had he? Okay, Zozo, is that your name?" The planchette moved again, faster this time. N-O-T-A-G-A-M-E. A chill ran down Jake's spine, but he pushed through, aware of the thousands watching. "Well, Zozo, or whoever you are, how about you prove you're real? Do something to convince our viewers." No sooner had the words left his mouth than the lights in Jake's room began to flicker. A low, rumbling sound filled the air, and objects on his shelves started to vibrate. "Holy shit," Jake whispered, his face pale in the pulsing light. "Guys, are you seeing this?" The chat was going wild, some viewers claiming they could hear whispers through their speakers, others swearing they saw a shadow move behind Jake. Suddenly, Jake's computer screen went black, then lit up with a series of rapidly scrolling symbols and letters. When it cleared, a single message remained, THEDOORISOPEN. Jake stared at the screen, his chest tight with fear. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't a stunt. Something was happening, something real and terrifying. "Guys," he said, his voice shaking, "I think we might have actually." The live stream cut off abruptly, leaving thousands of viewers staring at blank screens, wondering if they had just witnessed an elaborate hoax or something far more sinister. In a dimly lit office at the headquarters of Elysium Industries, Dr. Amelia Reeves watched a replay of Jake's live stream, her eyes gleaming with interest. "Impressive," she murmured. "The energy signatures are off the charts. And the spread, it's exponential." She turned to her assistant, a young man whose fingers flew across a keyboard, monitoring social media reactions in real time. "What's the reach?" "It's going viral, Dr. Reeves," he replied, his voice tinged with awe. "We're seeing mentions of Zozo and the Ouija challenge across all major platforms. Hashtags are trending worldwide." Amelia smiled, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "Perfect. Alert Mr. Forsyth. Tell him Phase 2 is ready to begin." As her assistant hurried off, Amelia turned back to the screens, watching as the digital wildfire spread. Thousands of young people around the world were now attempting their own Ouija challenges, unknowingly participating in the largest occult experiment in human history. And with each session, each invocation of Zozo's name, the veil between worlds grew thinner. Darren Chase's phone hadn't stopped buzzing for hours. Ever since Jake Martinez's live stream had cut off, his inbox had been flooded with messages from frightened viewers, amateur paranormal investigators, and concerned parents. As he scrolled through the deluge of emails and social media notifications, a Skype call came through. It was Dr. Elizabeth Chen. "Darren," she said as soon as he answered, her face grave on the screen. "Have you seen Jake Martinez's video?" "Yeah, I've seen it, along with about 1 million other people by now." Elizabeth ran a hand through her hair, her usual composure shaken.
"This is bad, Darren. Really bad."
"We're seeing a surge in Ouija-related incidents across the country. Emergency rooms, police stations, psychiatric wards, they're all reporting cases." Darren felt a knot forming in his stomach. "It's not just a trend, is it? This is really happening." "I'm afraid so," Elizabeth nodded. "And there's more. Dr. Thornton's been analysing the energy readings from some of these incidents," he says. "He says the patterns are consistent with what you'd expect to see in a massive summoning ritual." A summoning. Darren's blood ran cold. "You mean all these kids playing with Ouija boards, they're actually opening doors," Elizabeth finished. "Thousands of them, all at once." For a moment, neither spoke, the weight of the realization hanging heavy between them. Then Darren straightened, a look of determination crossing his face. "We need to warn people, shut this down before it goes any further." Elizabeth shook her head sadly. "I'm afraid it might already be too late, but we have to try. I'm calling everyone I know in the media, in academia. We need to get the word out." As they began to strategize, Darren couldn't shake the feeling that they were soldiers manning the barricades against an oncoming tidal wave. The Ouija board, once a curiosity, then a tool, had become a weapon, and in the hands of a generation raised on viral challenges and digital dares, it was more dangerous than ever. In his bedroom, surrounded by blinking electronics and the soft glow of computer screens, Jake Martinez slowly regained consciousness. His head throbbed, and his mouth tasted of copper and ash. As his vision cleared, he saw that his room was a disaster. Books strewn across the floor, posters torn from walls, his camera equipment smashed to pieces. And there, in the centre of it all, sat the antique Ouija board, unmarked and untouched amidst the chaos. Jake reached for his phone with trembling hands, seeing hundreds of missed calls and thousands of notifications. But as he tried to remember what had happened after the live stream cut off, he found only darkness, punctuated by flashes of terror and a voice that echoed in the depths of his mind. WELCOMETHEOTHERSID. Jake's finger hovered over the power button of his phone. He could call for help, tell someone what had happened. But as he stared at the Ouija board, he felt a strange pull, an urge he couldn't explain. Instead of dialing, he opened his video editing software. There was another live stream to plan. After all, his viewers were waiting. And something else was waiting too, just on the other side of the veil. Eager to reach through the digital realm and touch the minds of a world hungry for connection, even if that connection came from the darkest corners of existence. The Ouija challenge was just beginning, and the real game was about to start. Chapter 18. The Antique Shop's Secret. The bell above the door of Zell's Curiosities tinkled softly as Elizabeth Kennard stepped into the dimly lit shop. The scent of old books and polished wood enveloped her, a comforting smell that reminded her of long hours spent in her great-grandfather's study. As a direct descendant of Charles Kennard, one of the original creators of the Ouija board, Elizabeth had always felt a connection to the mystical device. But recent events had turned that connection into an obsession. Victor Zell, the proprietor, emerged from behind a towering stack of leather-bound tomes. His eyes, magnified by thick spectacles, lit up with recognition. "Ah, Miss Kennard, I've been expecting you," he said, his voice a raspy whisper that seemed to fit perfectly with the shop's atmosphere. Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. "Expecting me?" But I didn't call ahead. Zell's lips curled into a knowing smile. "My dear, in this business one learns to anticipate the arrival of seekers, especially those with, shall we say, a familial connection to the other side." He gestured for her to follow him deeper into the shop. As they wound their way through narrow aisles crammed with artifacts from every corner of the globe, Elizabeth's eyes darted from object to object. Shrunken heads grinned at her from high shelves, crystal balls sat nestled in velvet cushions, and what looked suspiciously like a mummified hand protruded from an ornate box. But it was the collection of Ouija boards that drew her attention. Dozens of them, from every era, lined the walls. Some were simple wooden affairs, others elaborately carved and inlaid with precious materials. "You have quite the collection, Mr. Zell," Elizabeth murmured, her fingers hovering over a particularly ornate board. "Indeed," Zell replied, "but I suspect you're here for something special, something that might shed light on the recent, shall we say, disturbances." Elizabeth's head snapped around to face him. "How do you know about that?" Zell's eyes twinkled mysteriously. "My dear, when one deals in objects of power, one tends to hear things. The veil is thinning, is it not, and your family's creation is at the centre of it all." He led her to a locked cabinet at the back of the shop. From his pocket he produced an ancient-looking key and, with a flourish, opened the cabinet to reveal an object shrouded in black velvet. "This," Zell said, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper, "is what you've been seeking, whether you knew it or not." With careful hands he lifted the velvet, revealing a board unlike any Elizabeth had ever seen. Instead of wood, it appeared to be made of a dark, reflective material that seemed to absorb the light around it. The letters were etched in silver, glowing faintly in the dim shop. "A black mirror board," Elizabeth breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. "I thought they were just a myth." Zell nodded approvingly. "Most are. This is one of only 3 known to exist. It's said to be a direct conduit to the deepest realms of the other side. A tool not just for communication, but for traversing the veil itself." Elizabeth's hand reached out, almost of its own accord, drawn to the board's dark surface. Just before her fingers made contact, Zell's hand shot out, grasping her wrist. "Careful," he warned, his jovial demeanour suddenly serious. "This is not a toy, Miss Kennard. It's a key to doors that, once opened, are not easily closed." Elizabeth withdrew her hand, a shiver running down her spine. "How did you come by such an object, Mr. Zell?" The old man's face grew sombre. "It was entrusted to me by a colleague who, well, let's just say he learned the hard way about the dangers of peering too deeply into the abyss. He disappeared shortly after leaving it in my care. That was in 1954. I've kept it safe ever since, waiting for the right person to claim it." "And you think I'm that person?" Elizabeth asked, a mix of fear and excitement coursing through her. Zell fixed her with a penetrating gaze. I think you're at the centre of a storm, Miss Kennard. Whether you're meant to calm it or unleash its full fury, that remains to be seen. He carefully rewrapped the board and handed it to Elizabeth. As she took it, she felt a jolt, as if a current of electricity had passed through her body. "Remember," Zell said as he escorted her to the door, "knowledge is power, but some knowledge comes at a terrible price. Use it wisely, and may the spirits guide your path." As Elizabeth stepped out into the busy New York street, clutching the wrapped board to her chest, she felt as if she had crossed an invisible threshold. The world around her seemed different somehow, the shadows deeper, the lights brighter. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from Darren Chase. "Elizabeth, we need to talk. Things are escalating. Meet me at the usual place in an hour." "It's urgent." She looked down at the package in her arms, then back at her phone. Whatever was coming, she knew that the Black Mirror board would play a crucial role. For better or worse, she was now inextricably linked to the unfolding drama that had begun with her great-grandfather's invention. As she hailed a taxi, Elizabeth couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. In shop windows and puddles on the street, she caught glimpses of movement, of faces that weren't quite human. The veil was thinning indeed, and Elizabeth Kennard stood at the threshold between worlds, holding a key that could open doors to realms beyond imagination, or unleash horrors beyond comprehension. The next move was hers, and the fate of two worlds hung in the balance. Chapter 19, Reverend's Crusade. The megachurch auditorium was packed to capacity, the air electric with anticipation. On the stage, bathed in the glow of spotlights, stood Reverend Michael Hayes, his charismatic presence commanding the attention of thousands. "My brothers and sisters," he boomed, his voice resonating through the state-of-the-art sound system, "we are facing a crisis of faith and morality. A plague has swept across our nation, invading our homes, corrupting our children. I speak, of course, of the Ouija board." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in fervent agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "These so-called games are nothing less than portals to hell itself," Hayes continued, his face contorting with righteous anger. "They invite demons into our lives, masquerading as departed loved ones or friendly spirits. But make no mistake, the only spirits these boards contact are those that seek to destroy us." As Hayes launched into a fiery sermon about the dangers of the occult, a small group of protesters gathered outside the church. They carried signs reading, "Ouija is not the enemy, and spiritualism is not Satanism." Among them was Sarah Jennings, a local medium who had been using the Ouija board for years to help people connect with deceased loved ones. She watched the live feed of Hayes's sermon on her phone, her face a mask of concern. "He doesn't understand," she murmured to her fellow protesters. "The board is just a tool. It's the intention that matters." Inside the church, Hayes was building to a crescendo. "I call upon all God-fearing citizens to join me in a nationwide campaign to rid our communities of these diabolical devices. Bring your Ouija boards to our collection points. We will destroy them in a holy fire, cleansing our nation of this evil influence." The crowd erupted in cheers and amens, many already reaching for their phones to spread the word on social media. Across town, in a modest office cluttered with religious texts and paranormal research papers, Dr. Evelyn Price watched a live stream of Hayes' sermon with growing alarm. As a religious studies professor specializing in the intersection of faith and the paranormal, she saw danger in the Reverend's black-and-white approach. She picked up her phone, dialing a familiar number. "Elizabeth, it's Evelyn. Have you seen what's happening with Reverend Hayes? I think we have a problem." Elizabeth Kennard's voice came through, tinged with worry. "I'm watching it now. This could undo years of research and understanding. We need to counter this somehow." "Agreed," Evelyn replied, "but we need to be careful. Hayes has a massive following, and he's tapping into a very real fear. If we're not strategic, we could make things worse." As they discussed potential responses, neither woman noticed the shadow that seemed to flicker at the edge of Evelyn's office, a formless darkness that lingered just out of sight, listening intently to their plans. In the heart of New York City, Elysium Industries CEO Michael Forsyth watched Hayes' sermon with a mixture of amusement and irritation. He turned to Dr. Amelia Reeves, who stood beside his desk, her face impassive. This televangelist could be a problem, Forsyth mused. His crusade might interfere with our plans. Reeves nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. Perhaps we could use this to our advantage, sir. A public controversy could drive even more people to experiment with the boards out of curiosity or rebellion. Forsyth's eyes gleamed with interest. Go on. We could anonymously fund both sides of the debate, Reeves suggested. Support Hayes' campaign publicly while secretly promoting Ouija use online. The clash would generate enormous energy we could harness for the final phase.
A slow smile spread across Forsyth's face.
Brilliant, Amelia. Make it happen. And keep a close eye on our friend the Reverend. I have a feeling there's more to his story than he's letting on. Back at the megachurch as the crowds filed out, energized by Hayes's call to action, the Reverend retreated to his private office. He locked the door behind him, his triumphant public persona falling away to reveal a man haunted by secrets. With trembling hands, he opened a hidden compartment in his desk. Inside lay a Ouija board, its wood dark with age and heavy use. Hayes ran his fingers over its surface, a complex mixture of longing, fear, and disgust playing across his face. "I'm doing this for you," he whispered to the empty room. "I'll save them all from what happened to us, no matter the cost." He placed his fingers on the planchette, closing his eyes as it began to move of its own accord. YOUCANNOTSCAPUS. Hayes jerked his hands away, his face pale with terror. He slammed the compartment shut, but not before a wisp of dark smoke seemed to seep out, curling around him like a possessive lover. As night fell over the city, the battle lines were being drawn. Reverend Hayes's crusade against the Ouija board was gaining momentum, fueled by fear, faith, and hidden agendas. But in the shadows, ancient forces stirred, amused by the mortal attempts to control powers beyond their comprehension. The Ouija board, once a simple parlor game, had become the focal point of a looming spiritual war. And as the veil between worlds continued to thin, the true cost of this conflict remained to be seen. Chapter 20. Corporate Spirits. The sleek, modern boardroom of Fuld Enterprises was a far cry from the dusty workshop where the Ouija board had first been created. Sophia Fuld, great-granddaughter of William Fuld, sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, her fingers drumming a nervous rhythm as she waited for the other executives to file in. At 35, Sophia was the youngest CEO in the company's history, and the weight of her family's legacy pressed heavily upon her shoulders. The Ouija board, once the cornerstone of their business, had become a contentious issue in recent years. With the surge of supernatural incidents and the growing public outcry, led by figures like Reverend Hayes, Sophia found herself at a crossroads. As the last of the board members took their seats, Sophia cleared her throat. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, we're here to discuss the future of our flagship product, a Ouija board." She clicked a remote, and a series of graphs appeared on the wall-mounted screen behind her. Sales have been unpredictable. We're seeing spikes of interest, followed by sharp declines, often coinciding with reported incidents or media coverage. Marcus Chen, the head of marketing, leaned forward. "That's not necessarily a bad thing, Sophia. Controversy sells. We could lean into the mystique, maybe partner with some of those ghost hunting shows." "Absolutely not," interrupted Dr. Eleanor Vance, the company's newly appointed ethics advisor. "We have a responsibility to consider the potential harm our product might be causing. These incidents, whether supernatural or not, are having real psychological impacts on people." The room erupted into heated debate. Sophia listened as her executives argued back and forth, the divide between profit and ethics growing wider with each passing moment. She thought of her great-grandfather, of the stories her family had passed down about his own struggles with the board's power. What would he do in her position? "Enough," Sophia said, her quiet voice cutting through the clamour. "We need a new approach, something that honours our history while addressing modern concerns." She turned to Robert Sanderson, head of product development. "Robert, what's the status of the new designs we discussed?" Sanderson nervously adjusted his glasses. "We've developed prototypes for the Safe Seance line. They incorporate safeguards, built-in timers, parental controls, even a smartphone app that monitors usage patterns for signs of obsessive behaviour." "And what about the special project?" Sophia asked, her voice lowering. Sanderson glanced around the room before responding. "The ethereal interface is in final testing. It's unlike anything we've ever created. The integration of quantum circuitry with traditional materials is pushing the boundaries of what we thought possible." A murmur ran through the room. The ethereal interface was Sophia's brainchild, a bold attempt to merge cutting-edge technology with the mystical properties of the Ouija board. Its development had been kept secret from all but a select few within the company. Dr. Vance frowned. "Sophia, I must object. We don't fully understand the implications of this technology. If the traditional boards are causing problems, imagine what might happen with something even more powerful." Sophia held up a hand. "I understand your concerns, Eleanor, but we can't bury our heads in the sand. The world is changing, and we need to change with it. If we don't control this technology, someone else will." As the meeting continued, none of the executives noticed the subtle flickering of the lights or the faint whispers that seemed to echo from the corners of the room. But Sophia felt it, a presence, familiar yet alien, that had haunted her family for generations. Later that evening, Sophia sat alone in her office, a prototype of the ethereal interface on her desk. Its sleek surface gleamed in the dim light, a far cry from the wooden boards of old. She hesitated for a moment before placing her fingers on its smooth-touch, sensitive surface. The board came to life, its interface glowing with an otherworldly light. Sophia felt a tingling sensation in her fingertips as she asked a question that had been burning in her mind all day. "Am I doing the right thing?" The response came swiftly, letters appearing on the screen faster than any human could type. THEVEIL, THINSBEWARE, THEHARVES. Sophia jerked her hands away, her heart pounding. This was no algorithm, no clever programming trick. Whatever had come through the ethereal interface was something else entirely. Her phone buzzed, startling her. It was a text from an unknown number. "Ms. Fuld, we need to talk. Your company's work has not gone unnoticed. Meet me tomorrow, noon, at the old Kirkbride Asylum. Come alone, the fate of more than just your business hangs in the balance." DC? Sophia stared at the message, a mixture of fear and curiosity washing over her. She glanced back at the ethereal interface, its screen now dark and innocent-looking. Whatever path she chose next would have consequences far beyond the bottom line of fooled enterprises. As she left her office, Sophia failed to notice the security camera in the corner. Its lens focused on the ethereal interface, transmitting data to a server far away, a server belonging to Elysium Industries. In his opulent office, Michael Forsyth watched the footage with keen interest. "Well, well, Miss Fuld," he murmured. "It seems you've opened a door even you don't fully understand. Don't worry, we'll be happy to help you." Manage the consequences. The chess pieces were moving, the players taking their positions, and somewhere in the space between worlds, ancient entities stirred, sensing that the game was about to change dramatically. The Ouija board in all its forms was evolving, and with it the very fabric of reality threatened to unravel. Chapter 21, The Canard Code. Elizabeth Canard's fingers traced the intricate patterns on the surface of the antique Ouija board, her brow furrowed in concentration. The board, one of the earliest models produced by the Canard Novelty Company, had been in her family for generations. But it wasn't until now, in the soft light of her study, that she noticed something peculiar about its design. "There's something here," she murmured, reaching for her magnifying glass. Hidden in plain sight all this time. As she examined the board more closely, Elizabeth's heart began to race. Tiny symbols, almost imperceptible to the naked eye, were etched into the wood grain around the letters and numbers. They formed a complex pattern that seemed to dance and shift as she moved the magnifying glass across the surface. Elizabeth's hand trembled as she reached for her phone. She needed an expert, someone who could help her make sense of this discovery. Her fingers hovered over the contact list before settling on a name. Dr. Evelyn Price. Hours later, Elizabeth's study was a mess of papers, books, and digital tablets. Dr. Price stood at a whiteboard, scribbling furiously as Elizabeth relayed her observations. "It's not just random decoration," Evelyn said, stepping back to survey their work. "These symbols form a code. Look at how they repeat and vary around certain letters." Elizabeth nodded, her excitement building. "But what does it mean? And why would my great-grandfather and his partners hide it in the board's design?" Evelyn tapped her marker against her chin thoughtfully. The Kennards were involved with spiritualist circles, weren't they? This could be related to some of the esoteric beliefs of the time. As they pored over historical documents and occult reference books, a pattern began to emerge. The symbols seemed to correspond to ancient alchemical and astrological signs, but arranged in a way neither woman had seen before. "Wait a minute," Elizabeth said suddenly, grabbing a piece of chalk. She began to draw on the floor, recreating the symbol pattern but on a larger scale. "What if it's not just a code, but a diagram?" Evelyn's eyes widened as she saw what Elizabeth was creating. "It's a map," she breathed. "A map of what?" "The spirit world." As the diagram took shape, covering most of the study floor, both women felt a change in the air. The room seemed to grow colder, and shadows deepened in the corners despite the bright overhead lights. "We need to be careful," Evelyn warned, a note of apprehension in her voice. "If this is what we think it is, we might be dealing with forces we don't fully understand." Elizabeth nodded, but her eyes gleamed with determination. "My great-grandfather left this for a reason. We need to see it through." With trembling hands, Elizabeth placed the ancient Ouija board at the centre of the chalk diagram. As soon as the wood touched the floor, a low hum filled the room, and the symbols on the board began to glow with a faint, otherworldly light. "Oh my God," Evelyn whispered. "It's a key. The board itself is a key too." Her words were cut off as the room plunged into darkness. When the lights flickered back on seconds later, both women gasped. The chalk diagram had changed, lines rearranging themselves into new patterns, revealing hidden connections and pathways. "It's showing us the way," Elizabeth said, her voice filled with awe and a hint of fear. "But to where?" Before Evelyn could respond, Elizabeth's phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. "You've taken the first step. But beware. Others seek what you've found. Trust no one. The veil is thinning and the harvest approaches. Meet me where it all began. You know the place." DC Elizabeth looked up at Evelyn, her face pale. "DC, could it be Darren Chase, the paranormal investigator?" Evelyn shook her head, her expression grave. "I don't know, but whoever it is, they know about the code. We're not the only ones looking into this, Elizabeth. And I have a feeling things are about to get very dangerous." As if to underscore her words, a cold breeze swept through the room, though all the windows were closed. The planchette on the Ouija board began to move of its own accord, spelling out a chilling message: THEDOOROPENSPOTHWAYS. Elizabeth and Evelyn exchanged looks of mingled excitement and terror. They had unlocked a secret hidden for over a century, but at what cost? And what forces had they unleashed in the process? As night fell outside, the two women bent over their notes, racing against time to decipher the full meaning of the Kennard Code. Little did they know that across the city, in boardrooms and hidden laboratories, others were pursuing the same knowledge, some for power, some for profit, and some for far darker purposes. The Ouija board, once a simple tool for communing with the dead, had become the key to unlocking the very fabric of reality itself. And as Elizabeth Kennard and Dr. Evelyn Price delved deeper into its mysteries, the boundary between our world and the next grew ever thinner. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the fate of not just two women or a single city, but of two realms locked in an eternal struggle. The final act of the Ouija board's dark history was about to begin. Chapter 22, Convergence. The abandoned Kirkbride Asylum loomed against the twilight sky. Its Gothic architecture a stark reminder of bygone eras and forgotten secrets. As night fell, a disparate group of individuals converged on the decaying structure, each drawn by forces they didn't fully understand. Elizabeth Kennard clutched the ancient Ouija board to her chest, its hidden symbols now a weight of knowledge and responsibility. Beside her, Dr. Evelyn Price scanned the grounds nervously, her academic skepticism warring with the undeniable reality of recent events. "Are you sure about this, Elizabeth?" Evelyn whispered. "Meeting here, with strangers." Before Elizabeth could respond, a figure emerged from the shadows. Darren Chase, the paranormal investigator, his face haggard from sleepless nights spent chasing the truth. "You made it," he said, relief evident in his voice. "We don't have much time." More figures appeared, Detective Sarah Chen, her hand never far from her holstered weapon. Sophia Fuld, the reluctant CEO of the modern Ouija company, and to everyone's surprise, Reverend Michael Hayes, his fire and brimstone demeanour subdued by a haunted look in his eyes. As introductions were made, tension crackled in the air like static electricity. Each person had a piece of the puzzle, a fragment of the truth that had brought them to this moment. "I know we all have our differences," Darren began, "but what's happening is bigger than any of us. The veil between worlds is thinning, and we're the only ones who can stop it." Sarah Chen stepped forward, her detective's instincts on high alert. "Stop what, exactly? I've got 2 dead bodies and a string of inexplicable incidents. Someone better start talking." Elizabeth took a deep breath and placed the Ouija board on a dusty table. "It's all connected. The murders, the possessions, the Zozo entity. It's all part of something my great-grandfather set in motion over a century ago." She explained about the Kennard Code, the hidden map within the board's design. As she spoke, the symbols on the board began to glow faintly, casting eerie shadows across the faces of those gathered. Reverend Hayes stared at the board, a mixture of fear and longing in his eyes. "It's a doorway," he murmured. "A doorway that should never have been opened." Sophia Fuld nodded grimly. "And my company's been mass-producing the key. God help us." Darren placed a laptop on the table, its screen displaying a global map dotted with pulsing red lights. "These are confirmed Ouija incidents in the past 24 hours. It's increasing exponentially. Whatever's coming, it's coming soon." As if in response to his words, a cold wind swept through the asylum, rattling windows and carrying with it whispers in 1,000 dead languages. "We need to know what we're dealing with," Sarah insisted. "And I hate to say it, but there's only one way to find out." All eyes turned to the Ouija board. With trembling hands, the group gathered around the table, their fingers lightly touching the planchette. Elizabeth, drawing on her family's legacy, spoke the words that would change everything. "We seek the truth behind the veil. Show us what lies beyond." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sudden violent motion, the planchette began to move. Faster and faster it flew across the board, spelling out messages too quickly to comprehend. The air grew thick and heavy, reality itself seeming to warp around them. A blinding light erupted from the board, and when it faded, the group found themselves no longer in the asylum, but in a vast, impossible space. Swirling nebulae and cosmic winds surrounded them, and in the distance, great shadowy forms moved with terrifying purpose. A voice, both within their minds and echoing across the cosmos, spoke. "We are the harvesters. You have called and we have answered." The entity that appeared before them was beyond description, a being of pure energy and ancient intelligence. Its presence was overwhelming, filling each person with a sense of insignificance in the face of cosmic truth. Your realm ripens, the harvest approaches. What was sealed shall be opened. Images flash through their minds. The creation of the first Ouija board, countless seances across decades, each one a tiny tear in the fabric of reality. They saw the true purpose of the Canard Code, not just a map, but a lock designed to keep something out, or perhaps to keep something in. As understanding dawned, horror followed. The Ouija boards, in all their forms, had been preparing humanity for this moment. Each session, each innocent game had been cultivating human consciousness, making it ripe for harvesting. Sophia Fold fell to her knees, the weight of her family's unwitting role in this cosmic plan crushing down on her. Reverend Hayes wept silently, his faith shaken to its core. Detective Chen's mind raced, trying to reconcile the impossible with her duty to protect. Elizabeth stepped forward, her voice somehow steady. "What do you want from us?" The entity's response reverberated through their very beings. "We want what we have always wanted. Evolution, transcendence. Your realm and ours joined as one. And if we refuse?" Darren asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. "Refusal is irrelevant. The process has begun. You are merely witnesses to the inevitable." As quickly as it had appeared, the cosmic vision vanished. The group found themselves back in the asylum, shaken to their cores. The Ouija board on the table smouldered, its wood charred and twisted. In the silence that followed, each person grappled with the enormity of what they had witnessed. The truth behind the Ouija phenomenon was far greater and more terrible than any of them had imagined. As dawn broke over the asylum, casting long shadows across the weathered stone, the unlikely group of allies faced a grim reality. They alone stood between two worlds on the brink of catastrophic convergence. The final battle for the fate of humanity was about to begin. And the Ouija board, that simple wooden tool that had started it all, would be at the center of the storm. Little did they know, eyes watched them from the shadows. In his hidden command center, Michael Forsyth of Elysium Industries smiled coldly. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The stage was set, the players were in position. And the true game was only just beginning. Chapter 23. Beyond the veil, the asylum's walls seemed to breathe, pulsing with an otherworldly energy that left the assembled group on edge. In the aftermath of their cosmic vision, each person grappled with the weight of their newfound knowledge and the terrifying implications it held. Elizabeth Kennard's fingers traced the charred edges of the Ouija board, her mind reeling. "We've been pawns," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "All this time, my family's legacy. It was all leading to this." Dr. Evelyn Price placed a comforting hand on Elizabeth's shoulder. "We couldn't have known. But now that we do, we have a responsibility to act." Darren Chase paced the room, his investigator's mind working overtime. The harvesters, the thinning veil, the increase in Ouija activity. It's all connected. But how do we stop something on this scale? Detective Sarah Chen, ever practical, cut through the philosophical debate. "We need a plan, concrete steps. What do we actually know about these harvesters and how they operate?" As the group debated their next move, a chill swept through the room. The air shimmered, and suddenly each person found themselves alone, facing their deepest fears and most secret desires. Elizabeth stood in her great-grandfather's workshop, surrounded by prototypes of the first Ouija boards. The ghost of Charles Kennard materialized before her, his eyes filled with sorrow. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice echoing as if from a great distance. "I never meant for this to happen. But you have the power to end it, Elizabeth. You carry our legacy, our mistakes, and our redemption." Elizabeth reached out to touch him, but her hand passed through empty air. "How?" she pleaded. "How do I fix this?" Before Charles could answer, the vision shifted. Reverend Hayes found himself in his church, the pews filled with accusing faces. His congregation, his followers, all stared at him with knowledge of his hypocrisy, his secret obsession with the very thing he preached against. "You led us astray," they chanted in unison. "You opened the door." Hayes fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "I only wanted to protect you," he sobbed, "to save you from what I experienced." In another corner of the Whisper Realm, Sophia Fuld stood before a massive assembly line, watching as Ouija boards rolled off by the thousands. Each one glowed with an eerie light, and she could hear the whispers of countless souls trapped within the wood. "This is your legacy," a voice that sounded like her great-grandfather's echoed around her. "You've mass-produced doom. But you also hold the key to salvation." Sophia's hand hovered over the emergency stop button. Could she do it? Could she destroy her family's company, her entire life's work? Detective Chen found herself back at the scene of the Benton City murders, but this time she could see the invisible forces at play. Tendrils of dark energy snaked through the air, connecting the Ouija board to the victims. "You were right to be suspicious," her grandfather's voice whispered in her ear. "But are you prepared to accept a truth that defies everything you've believed in?" Sarah's hand instinctively went to her badge, a symbol of the rational world she had dedicated her life to. But as she watched the supernatural forces swirl around her, she felt her certainties crumbling. Darren Chase stood alone in a vast library, books floating off shelves and swirling around him. Each tome contained knowledge of the paranormal, secrets he had spent his life pursuing. "You wanted answers," a chorus of voices echoed. "But can you handle the truth? Knowledge is power, but it's also a burden." Darren reached for a book, its pages filled with revelations about the harvesters and their true nature. As he read, he felt his mind expanding, teetering on the edge of comprehension and madness. Dr. Evelyn Price found herself in a lecture hall, facing a panel of her academic peers. They looked at her with a mixture of skepticism and pity. "You've thrown away your reputation for fairy tales and ghost stories," the panel's chairperson sneered. "Was it worth it, Dr. Price, to sacrifice your credibility for unprovable theories?" Evelyn stood tall, a lifetime of research and experiences flashing before her eyes. "It's not about proving anything," she said, her voice growing stronger. "It's about expanding our understanding of the universe, even if it challenges everything we think we know." As suddenly as they had been separated, the group snapped back to reality, finding themselves once again in the asylum. But something had changed. The air crackled with potential, and each person's eyes shone with new purpose and understanding. "The Whisper Realm," Elizabeth breathed. "It's real. It's where the harvesters exist, between our world and theirs." Darren nodded, his mind racing with the knowledge he had glimpsed. "It's not just a place, it's a state of being. The Ouija boards, they're not just communication devices, they're attunement tools. They've been preparing humanity to perceive and enter the Whisper Realm. Which means," Sophia added, a look of dawning horror on her face, "every time someone uses a board, they're not just talking to spirits. They're thinning the veil, making it easier for the harvesters to cross over." Reverend Hayes, his face etched with guilt and resolve, spoke up. "Then we need to close the door. Permanently. Whatever it takes." Sarah Chen, her skepticism warring with what she had witnessed, made a decision. "I'm in. Whatever this is, whatever we're facing, it's real. And it's our job to protect people." Dr. Price smiled, a glimmer of excitement in her eyes despite the dire situation. "We're standing on the precipice of the greatest discovery in human history, the merging of science and spirituality. But we need to make sure that merger happens on our terms, not theirs." As the group steeled themselves for the battle ahead, a low rumble shook the building. Outside, the sky darkened unnaturally, swirling clouds forming a vortex above the asylum. The harvesters were coming. Elizabeth picked up the charred Ouija board, its hidden symbols now glowing with an inner light. "This is where it started," she said, her voice filled with determination. "And this is where it ends." As one, the unlikely allies moved to face the oncoming storm. The final battle for the fate of two realms was about to begin, with the Ouija board and the very nature of reality hanging in the balance. In the shadows, unseen by the group, a figure watched with keen interest. Michael Forsyth of Elysium Industries smiled to himself. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The true endgame was about to unfold, and he intended to be the one controlling the board when the dust settled. The Whisper Realm trembled with anticipation. The veil between worlds stretched thin as gossamer, and in the eye of the storm, a small group of humans prepared to challenge the cosmic forces that threatened to reshape existence itself. The time for talking was over. The time for action had come. Chapter 24. The Final Message. The vortex above the asylum writhed like a living thing, tendrils of otherworldly energy reaching down to caress the crumbling walls. Inside, the unlikely group of allies stood in a tight circle, the charred Ouija board at their centre, its symbols pulsing with an inner light. Elizabeth Kennard took a deep breath, her hands steady as she placed them on the planchette. "Whatever happens," she said, her voice carrying above the growing tempest, "we face it together." One by one, the others joined her. Dr. Evelyn Price, her scientific skepticism now tempered by undeniable experience. Darren Chase, the paranormal investigator who had finally found the proof he'd spent a lifetime seeking. Detective Sarah Chen, her rational mind struggling to reconcile the impossible. Sophia Fuld, carrying the weight of her family's legacy, and Reverend Michael Hayes, his faith shaken but not broken. As their fingers touched the wooden pointer, a surge of energy coursed through them. The asylum dissolved around them, reality peeling away like layers of an onion. They found themselves suspended in the Whisper Realm, a place between worlds where thought and matter were one. Before them loomed the Harvesters, vast and incomprehensible beings of pure energy and ancient intellect. Their voices resonated through the fabric of existence itself. The harvest is upon us. The veil falls. Two worlds become one. Elizabeth stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "We won't let you destroy our world. There must be another way." A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through the Harvesters. "Destroy. We bring transcendence, evolution, the next step in your species' journey." Images flooded their minds. A world where the barriers between the physical and spiritual had crumbled, where humanity had evolved beyond its current limitations, merging with the realm of spirit and energy. Sophia gasped, overwhelmed by the vision. Is this what my family's work was leading to all along?" "Yes and no. You were the key, but the lock was always there." Darren's eyes widened with sudden understanding. The Kennard Code. It wasn't just a map, it was a failsafe. Elizabeth nodded, pieces falling into place. A way to close the door if things went too far. The Harvester's energy pulsed, a note of warning in their collective voice. The code is flawed, incomplete. To use it would bring catastrophe. Reverend Hayes stepped forward, his face set with determination. "Then we'll complete it. Here, now, in this realm where all things are possible." Dr. Price's mind raced, connecting dots across centuries of occult knowledge and scientific theory. "We need to rewrite the fundamental equations of reality. Alter the resonance frequency between our worlds." Detective Chen, her practical nature asserting itself even in this impossible situation, asked the crucial question, how? The answer came not from words, but from a sudden shared understanding. Each of them held a piece of the puzzle. Elizabeth's inherited knowledge, Evelyn's scientific insight, Darren's years of paranormal research, Sarah's grounding in reality, Sophia's connection to the board's evolution, and Michael's understanding of faith and the human spirit. Together, they began to move, their actions in the Whisper Realm translating to changes in the very fabric of reality. They danced on the edge of creation, rewriting the rules that governed the intersection of worlds. The Harvester's energy swirled around them by turns threatening and encouraging. This was a test, they realized, a cosmic crucible to determine humanity's readiness for the next stage of evolution. As they worked, weaving new patterns into the tapestry of existence, a figure materialized at the edge of their awareness. Michael Forsyth, CEO of Elysium Industries, his face a mask of awe and avarice. "Do you see now?" he called out. "The power we could wield. We could reshape reality itself." Sophia turned to him, her eyes blazing with newfound purpose. "That's not our decision to make, Michael. We're custodians, not conquerors." With a final monumental effort, the group completed their work. The Kennard Code, expanded and perfected, spread out across the dimensions. Reality shuddered, realigning itself to the new parameters they had set. The harvester's voice echoed one last time. "It is done. The test is passed. The harvest postponed." The whisper realm began to fade around them, the normal world reasserting itself. As they felt themselves being pulled back, Elizabeth called out one last question. "Will we see you again?" The answer came as a whisper, fading like mist in the morning sun. "We are always here, in the spaces between," waiting. With a jolt, the group found themselves back in the asylum. The vortex above had vanished, the night sky clear and star-studded. The Ouija board on the floor was whole again, its surface unmarked, but for a new set of symbols etched around its edge, the completed Kennard Code. As dawn broke, painting the asylum in hues of gold and pink, the unlikely allies looked at each other, forever changed by their experience. "What now?" Darren asked, breaking the silence. Elizabeth picked up the Ouija board, running her fingers over its surface. "Now, we become guardians. We protect the knowledge, guide those who seek it, and prepare humanity for the day when the veil thins again." Sophia nodded, a new resolve in her eyes. "I'll transform the company. We'll create tools for spiritual growth, not just entertainment. And I'll be there to make sure things don't get out of hand," Sarah added, a wry smile on her face. Reverend Hayes straightened his collar. "I'll preach a new gospel, one of unity between science and faith, of responsibility in the face of cosmic wonders." Dr. Price's eyes sparkled with excitement. "There's so much to study, to understand. We've only scratched the surface." As they made plans dividing responsibilities and setting safeguards in place, none of them noticed the shadowy figure of Michael Forsyth slipping away. In his hand he clutched a small wooden fragment that had broken off the Ouija board during their ordeal, a piece that contained a portion of the new Kennard Code. Miles away, in a secret Elysium Industries facility, machines hummed to life, ready to analyze this new piece of the cosmic puzzle. The Ouija board had evolved, its purpose transformed. No longer a simple tool for parlor games, it now stood as a symbol of humanity's potential and the bridge between worlds. The danger was not gone, but neither was the wonder. As the group left the asylum, stepping into the bright morning light, the Ouija board in Elizabeth's hand seemed to pulse once. A final message spelling itself out. The game is never truly over. The journey that had begun with a simple wooden board had led to the very edges of reality. And though this chapter was closing, the story of humanity's dance with the unknown was far from finished. In homes across the world, Ouija boards sat in attics and on shelves waiting, and in the whisper realm just beyond the veil of normal perception, ancient entities watched and waited, knowing that one day the game would begin anew. The end.